This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never really shared this story before, not the whole thing anyway. It's been almost 60 years, but I still wake up in cold sweats some nights. My name's Elaine, and back in 1965, I moved my 6 kids to Carmel after my divorce. I thought it would be a fresh start for us, a beautiful coastal town with artists and free thinkers, the kind of community where we could heal and build something new. At first, things were looking up. I found this lovely furnished rental from a woman who was traveling through Europe for a year. The kids settled into their new schools, and I started building a small business, selling cosmetics and wigs through home parties. Money was tight with 6 mouths to feed, but we were managing. About 3 months in, I bumped into this real estate agent at the grocery store. We got to talking, and she mentioned this property that had just come on the market, a 3-level townhouse with an attic, walking distance to the beach. When she told me the price, I laughed. It was absurdly low for Carmel even back then. Then she mentioned there was no down payment required. I remember thinking it was too good to be true, but with the rental owner coming back in a few months, I was desperate for a permanent place. I signed the papers within a week. The kids were thrilled. Marcus and Jonathan, my oldest boys, would share the attic space. Charity and Faith would take the 2nd floor bedroom, while Hope and Grace, my youngest twins, would take the other upstairs room. I took the main floor bedroom. It felt perfect. The trouble started our very first night. I was unpacking boxes in the kitchen when I distinctly heard someone call my name. Elaine. Clear as day, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nobody there. I figured it was one of the kids playing tricks. That same night, Marcus came downstairs looking pale. He asked if I'd been up in the attic. When I said no, he just nodded and went back up. The next morning, he told me he'd heard footsteps crossing the attic floor while he was trying to fall asleep, but Jonathan had already been asleep in his bed. I dismissed it. Old houses make noises, right? But then things started disappearing. Not valuable things, just random items. Faith's hairbrush vanished from her dresser, only to appear in the kitchen sink the next morning. Jonathan's baseball glove moved from his backpack to the front porch. I blamed the kids for being disorganized, but they all swore they hadn't moved anything. By the end of the first week, the fighting started. My kids argued occasionally like all siblings do, but this was different. They'd explode at each other over nothing. Vicious, hateful words that didn't sound like them at all. Charity, who was always my most sensitive child, started spending hours alone in her room or outside talking to the trees. When I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd just stare at me with this vacant look and say she couldn't remember what she'd been doing, said her memories felt foggy. About 2 weeks after moving in, I woke up to the sound of running footsteps on the stairs. It was around 2 in the morning, heavy, deliberate steps, running up, then down, then up again. I got out of bed, certain one of the kids was up, but when I opened my door, the hallway was empty and the footsteps stopped. I checked every room. All 6 kids were sound asleep. I convinced myself it was just the house settling or maybe plumbing issues. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, Hope's favorite doll was on top of the refrigerator. She was only 7 and couldn't have reached up there. When I asked who put it there, everyone denied doing it. That's when Jonathan admitted he'd been having nightmares every night since we moved in. Dreams where he couldn't breathe, like something was sitting on his chest. I tried to keep a brave face. We were finally homeowners. I couldn't afford to move again, and I didn't want to scare the kids with my own growing unease. Then came the night Marcus saw it. He'd gone up to the attic to get something from his dresser while Jonathan was downstairs. He described seeing a dark blob floating near his bed. Not quite solid, but not quite smoke either. He said it moved toward him, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He ran downstairs, and as he did, he heard it coming after him. The pictures on the stairway wall flew off as he passed, smashing on the steps. I saw the aftermath myself, glass everywhere, and Marcus white as a sheet, shaking uncontrollably. I called a friend from church who came over with sage and prayers. We went through every room, burning sage and reciting prayers. It seemed to help for about 3 days. Then it got worse. Objects started flying across rooms with no one near them. The kids would wake up with scratches on their arms or legs. Grace, who was sharing a room with Hope, started screaming one night that there was an old woman standing at the foot of her bed. When I rushed in, there was nothing there, but the room was freezing cold in the middle of summer. Charity's behavior became increasingly concerning. She'd always loved animals and had pet mice she kept in the attic. She doted on those mice like they were her children. I was hosting a wig party at the house. About 15 potential customers were there in the living room, when suddenly one of Charity's mice appeared in the middle of the display table. The women screamed, chairs toppled, and 2 ladies left immediately. The cage was in the attic with a secure latch. There was no way that Mouse could have gotten out, down 2 flights of stairs, and onto that table. Later that week, Charity came downstairs sobbing hysterically. A wild rat had somehow gotten into the locked cage and killed all her mice. The cage was still latched, completely intact. It was impossible. I started reaching out for help more desperately. A psychic came and left within 10 minutes, refusing to even accept payment. She just kept saying, "This isn't something I can help with." A local spiritual healer tried cleansing the house and collapsed on our front lawn afterward, vomiting uncontrollably. The children were seeing things regularly now. Jonathan described a man with no face standing in the corner of the attic. Faith refused to use the upstairs bathroom because she said someone was always watching through the mirror. Marcus started sleeping in my room on the floor because the attic had become unbearable. One night I woke up to Charity screaming. When I got to her room, she was pressed against the headboard, pointing at the ceiling, her face contorted in terror. The other kids had gathered in the doorway. There was nothing visible, but the temperature in the room had to be 40 degrees. As we stood there, the dresser suddenly slid across the floor toward us, and the window shade snapped up so hard it tore from the roller. That's when I called Father McAllister from the local parish. He wasn't our usual priest, but a friend had recommended him specifically. He came the next day with holy water and his Bible. He spent hours going through the house, room by room. When he came down from the attic, his face was ashen. He pulled me aside and said, "Mrs. Wilcox, you need to leave this house today. Don't spend another night here." His intensity frightened me, but I explained we had nowhere to go. He made some calls and arranged for us to stay at a church member's vacation home temporarily. He performed what I later learned was an exorcism ritual throughout the house, focusing especially on the attic. By the time he finished, it was evening, and he insisted we leave immediately, coming back for our belongings the next day. We spent an uneasy night at the vacation home, and the following morning, Father McAllister accompanied us back to pack our essential items. What we found was chaos. Furniture was overturned, clothing strewn everywhere. As we started gathering our things, objects began flying at us: books, picture frames, even kitchen knives. Father McAllister was hit in the shoulder with a paperweight that flew across the room. He grabbed my arm and said, "Leave it all. Just get the children and go." We fled with only the clothes on our backs. I never went back inside that house again. I sent a letter relinquishing ownership to the bank and walked away from the biggest investment of my life. It wasn't until months later that I learned the truth. A local historian told me the house had been donated to the church years before, after 2 priests were found murdered there. Throats slashed, demonic symbols drawn in blood on the walls. The police had ruled it a cult killing. The church had sold it, and since then it had changed hands 5 times in just 2 years before I bought it. I've spent decades trying to make sense of what happened in that house. Some nights I still hear those footsteps running up and down the stairs in my dreams. I've never been able to explain how that wild rat got into a locked cage, or how Charity's mouse appeared on my display table, or what Marcus saw in the attic that night. All I know is that something was in that house with us, something that didn't want us there. And sometimes, even now, I wake up feeling like it followed us out. Story 2. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to start this. My hands are shaking even now. I guess I should just dive in. 3 months ago, I bought what I thought was my dream home in Pine Grove. It's this beautiful 1920s craftsman with all the original woodwork, stained glass windows, and those charming little nooks and crannies you just don't find in modern houses. And the price? It was almost suspiciously low, but the real estate agent said the previous owners were eager to sell after inheriting it from a distant relative. Who was I to question such good fortune? Being an art restorer, I fell in love with all the vintage details. The moment I walked in, I could picture myself working in the sunroom, surrounded by all that natural light. The house needed some TLC, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. My first week there was spent unpacking and exploring every corner of my new home. That's when I found it, tucked away in the attic crawl space, an old painting, probably from the same era as the house. It was filthy and damaged, but I could make out a couple and what looked like a baby. The frame was ornate, though tarnished with age. I immediately knew I wanted to restore it. My friend Andrea came over to help me unpack the weekend after I moved in. We were in the kitchen, sorting through boxes of dishes when she suddenly stopped and looked around. "Laura, does something feel off to you about this place?" she asked, hugging herself like she was cold, even though it was actually pretty warm. I laughed it off. "What do you mean? It's perfect." "I don't know." She wrinkled her nose. "There's a smell in here, like old sadness, and it feels heavy." I rolled my eyes. Andrea's always been into that spiritual stuff, crystals, auras, the whole 9 yards. It's just an old house. Probably needs some air freshener. "No, it's not that kind of smell." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Just be careful, okay?" I changed the subject. The house was perfect, and I didn't want her weird vibes ruining it for me. That night, though, something happened that I still can't explain. I was taking a shower before bed, exhausted from all the unpacking. I had my eyes closed, letting the hot water run over my face, when I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, not grabbing, just resting there, like someone trying to get my attention. I screamed and spun around, nearly slipping on the wet tile, but there was no one there. The bathroom door was still closed and locked. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overtired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Over the next few weeks, little things started happening. At first, they were easy to dismiss. Keys not where I left them, lights I was sure I'd turned off being on when I got home. Then they escalated. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and heard the front door slam behind me. I wasn't concerned until I tried to get back in and found it locked. All the doors were locked. I had to call a locksmith who looked at me like I was crazy when I told him I hadn't locked myself out. "These old deadbolts don't just lock themselves, ma'am," he said with this condescending smile. Then there was the newspaper incident. I was making coffee one morning when I heard pages turning in the living room. I'd left the newspaper folded on the coffee table, but when I walked in, it was open, pages flipping one by one like someone was reading it. There wasn't even a breeze. All the windows were closed. The noises were the worst. Pipes banging in the walls at 3 in the morning, drawers slamming shut in empty rooms. I started calling whatever it was Bill, just to make it less scary, I guess. "Stop it, Bill," I'd say out loud when something weird happened, as if giving it a name would somehow make me feel more in control. I didn't tell anyone about these incidents. I was afraid they'd think I was losing it. Maybe I was. Maybe the pressure of the mortgage and the restoration business and living alone was getting to me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right with the house. It was about 2 months after moving in when I finally started working on that painting I'd found. My business had been busy, and I hadn't had time to look at it properly. I set it up in my workroom and began the cleaning process, carefully removing layers of grime. As the image became clearer, I could see it was a formal portrait. A man in a navy blue pinstriped suit standing stiffly beside a woman in a pink dress who was holding a baby. But something about it was unsettling. The couple looked stern, unsmiling. The man's eyes seemed to follow me around the room, and the baby. There was something off about it. It didn't look connected to the woman holding it, like it had been added as an afterthought. I was taking a break from the restoration, stretching my back, when I noticed a floorboard near my work table that looked slightly raised. Curious, I knelt down and pried it up with a screwdriver. Inside the small cavity was a silver baby rattle, tarnished black with age. As I picked it up, I heard it, a baby crying, distant but clear, coming from somewhere inside the walls. I dropped the rattle like it had burned me. The crying stopped immediately. I told myself it was just the old pipes or maybe a cat outside. But that night, I woke up at exactly 3 o'clock to the sound of sobbing. I followed it to the hallway, where something made me stop dead in my tracks. The wallpaper was weeping. I swear to God, there were tears rolling down the wall, leaving dark trails behind them. I touched one. It was wet and warm. I ran back to my bedroom and locked the door, spending the rest of the night huddled under my blankets like a scared kid. The next day, I convinced myself it had been a dream. I went back to working on the painting, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of restoration. It took another week to finish it. I was applying the final protective layer when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The baby was gone from the painting, not like it had been painted over. There was no trace it had ever been there, just the stern couple, the woman's arms empty where she'd been holding the infant. I compared it to photos I'd taken when I started the restoration. The baby had definitely been there. That's when I decided I needed to learn more about this house. I went to the local library and asked if they had any information on the history of homes in the area. The librarian's face changed when I gave her my address. "The Delaney house," she said quietly. "You bought the Delaney house?" She took me to the newspaper archives and pulled out a file. The headlines from 1929 told the story in pieces. Elizabeth Delaney, who had suffered a miscarriage, had killed her sister's infant son in a fit of postpartum psychosis. Her husband, William Delaney, had disappeared the same night. The police assumed he had fled after discovering what his wife had done, but his body was never found. I felt sick as I read the articles. The descriptions matched the couple in my painting perfectly, right down to William's navy pinstriped suit and Elizabeth's pink dress, and the baby in the painting had been their nephew Thomas. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. As I pulled into the driveway, something caught my eye. A light in an upstairs window I'd never noticed before. It was on the north side of the house, but as far as I knew, there was just a blank wall there. I entered the house cautiously, half expecting Bill to make his presence known. The house was quiet, too quiet. No creaking floorboards, no settling noises. I went upstairs and walked down the hallway toward where I'd seen the light. But the hallway ended at the linen closet with no room beyond it. I stood there confused when I noticed a slight draft coming from behind the closet. I pulled out all the linens and pressed against the back wall. It gave slightly. Heart pounding, I pushed harder, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden room. The smell hit me first, musty, decayed, wrong. The room was small, obviously a nursery. There was a wooden cradle in the center, a rocking chair in the corner, and yellowed nursery rhyme prints on the walls. And slumped in the rocking chair was what was left of William Delaney, still wearing his navy pinstriped suit. He was mostly skeleton now, but patches of mummified skin still clung to his bones. There was a gaping hole in his chest, the cause of death clear even to my untrained eye. His bony fingers were clutching something, a small blanket embroidered with the initials TD. I screamed then, backing out of the room and fumbling for my phone. The police arrived quickly. I babbled my story to them, showing them the newspaper articles I'd printed from the library. They were professional, treating me like I was in shock rather than crazy, which I appreciated. As they removed William's remains, I felt a cool breeze on the back of my neck. Looking toward the nursery, I saw the light I'd noticed from outside flickering softly, then fading away completely. In that moment, I knew that Bill, William, had finally found peace. The investigation revealed that Elizabeth had likely killed her husband after he discovered what she'd done to their nephew. She'd walled up his body and the nursery, taking her own life shortly after. The house had passed through several owners over the decades, but no one had discovered the hidden room until now. I still live in the house. The noises have stopped. The painting hangs in my living room. Just the couple now. Their sad story finally told. Sometimes I think I hear the faint sound of a baby rattle, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever. I just wish I knew why the baby disappeared from the painting once William's body was found. That's the one thing I still can't explain. Story. I'm writing this because I need to get it off my chest. It's been nearly 20 years and I still wake up in cold sweat sometimes when I think I hear that sound in the distance. This happened back in 2005 in Cairns, Queensland. I was 14 then, just a kid really, but old enough to think I knew everything. Me and my two best mates, Jake and Matt, were typical teenagers, bored out of our minds most weekends and always looking for something to do in our sleepy neighborhood. The Barrett house had been sitting empty for years at that point. It was this weathered Queenslander about 3 streets over from mine. You know the type, raised on stilts with a wraparound veranda. Though the white paint had gone all yellow and peeling, everyone in town knew the story. The Barrett family, Mum, Dad, and their 2 kids, had just vanished one night back in 1998. No warning, no goodbyes, nothing taken from the house. One day they were there, the next they weren't. My mum used to gossip about it with the other parents. According to what I overheard, the neighbors had noticed the house was unusually quiet one morning. No movement, no lights turning on and off. After a couple days, someone called the police. When they went in, they found dinner plates still on the table, coffee mugs half full, like everyone had just got up in the middle of their evening routine and walked out. The family car was still in the garage, their wallets and keys were still in the house. No signs of a struggle or anything like that. The creepiest part though, and this is what had us obsessed, was that the cops supposedly found a message scratched into the wooden floorboards of the kids' bedroom. We heard the whistle, it's coming, just that, nothing else. For years after, no one bought the place. It just sat there, empty. The council would send someone to mow the lawn every few months, but that was about it. Kids would dare each other to run up and touch the front door, but no one ever went inside. At least, that's what everyone claimed. One Friday night in July, the 3 of us were hanging out at Matt's place, his parents gone for the weekend. We'd been watching horror movies and talking shit when Jake brought up the Barrett house. We should check it out, he said, like it was nothing. For real, actually, go inside. Matt was hesitant. No way, man. That place gives me the creeps. I remember feeling a weird mix of fear and excitement. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? That's how dumb I was back then. What's the worst that could happen? Jesus, we grabbed our phones for flashlights. This was before smartphones were good for much else, and a couple of Cokes from Matt's fridge. It was around 10 at night when we headed over. The air thick with humidity like it always is in North Queensland. Mosquitoes buzzed around us as we walked the dark streets, our voices dropping to whispers as we approached the house. It looked even worse up close. The yard was overgrown despite the council's efforts, and the moonlight cast weird shadows through the trees onto the peeling walls. We circled around to the back, where the veranda was lower to the ground. "Look," Matt whispered, pointing at a window. The glass was busted out, leaving a hole big enough to climb through. "Someone's been here before us," Jake said, sounding almost disappointed. I remember hesitating, suddenly not sure this was such a great idea. Maybe we should go back. But Jake was already hoisting himself up onto the veranda and through the window. "Don't be such a pussy, Marcus," he called back, his voice muffled from inside. I looked at Matt, who shrugged, and then we followed Jake through the window. The smell hit me first. That musty, abandoned smell of a house that's been closed up for years. Dust, mold, and something else I couldn't place. It was pitch black inside, our phone lights casting weak beams that barely cut through the darkness. We were in what must have been the kitchen. There were still dishes in the sink. I remember that clearly. Plates with crusty, long-decayed food stuck to them. "This is mental," Matt whispered, shining his light around. Jake pushed forward into the living room. "Look, the TV's still here, and magazines on the coffee table." He was right. It was like a time capsule from 1998. There was even a TV guide open on the sofa. The place hadn't been looted or anything, just left to rot. We moved through the house slowly, our footsteps creaking on the old wooden floors. Each room was the same, perfectly preserved but coated in dust and cobwebs. In the master bedroom, there were clothes still laid out on the bed, like someone had been deciding what to wear. The kids' bedroom was what we really wanted to see, though. We'd heard about the message scratched into the floor. The room had 2 small beds, posters of 90s bands on the walls, and toys scattered around. And there it was, in the center of the floor, crude letters carved deep into the wood. We heard the whistle. "It's coming." I remember feeling the hair on my arms stand up. The message seemed urgent, desperate. "Who do you reckon did it?" Matt asked, his voice barely audible. "Had to be one of the kids," Jake said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. As we stood there staring at the message, I felt something strange. The floor beneath me seemed to vibrate slightly, like someone was walking in another part of the house. I remember looking at my friends to see if they felt it too, but they were still fixated on the message. "Guys," I whispered, "I think—" Before I could finish, Matt's phone rang, making us all jump. He fumbled with it, trying to silence it, his face pale in the blue light of the screen. "Shit, sorry," he muttered, declining the call. But now we were all on edge. The slight vibration I'd felt earlier seemed stronger. The house was humming somehow. "Let's get out of here," I said, and for once Jake didn't argue. We headed back toward the kitchen and the broken window we'd climbed through. That's when Matt stopped suddenly. "Wait," he said, "I need to check something." Before we could stop him, he'd pushed open the back door and stepped out onto the veranda. Jake and I followed reluctantly. "Matt, come on, let's go," Jake hissed. But Matt was already down the steps, standing in the overgrown backyard, shining his phone light at something on the ground. "What the hell?" he said, his voice strange. "You guys need to see this." We joined him in the yard, and that's when I saw them. Train tracks, actual metal train tracks, running from the back fence straight toward the house. They disappeared under the structure, as if the house had been built right over them. "This isn't right," I said, my mouth dry. "These weren't here when we came in." "Maybe we just didn't notice them in the dark," Jake suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. Matt shook his head. "No way. I've been by this house dozens of times. There have never been train tracks here. I'd walked past this place plenty of times too. There had definitely never been train tracks. The nearest railway line was kilometers away." "This is fucked," Jake said, backing away. "We need to leave, now." But Matt was already walking along the tracks, shining his light ahead of him. "They lead straight to the fence. But look, they don't continue on the other side." He was right. The tracks ran from the house to the fence and just stopped, like they existed only within the boundaries of the property. That's when we heard it. A whistle. Distant at first, but clear as day in the quiet night. It wasn't like a modern train. It was an old sound, like the steam engines in history books, and it was getting louder. We all froze, looking at each other in disbelief. "That's not possible," I whispered. The whistle came again, closer now, and with it a rhythmic chugging sound and the distinct metal-on-metal clack of wheels on tracks. But the sound wasn't coming from outside the property. It was coming from inside the house. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we didn't need to be told twice. We bolted for the fence, scrambling over it in panic. I remember my jeans catching on a nail and ripping, but I barely felt it. We ran until we reached the road, gasping for breath, and turned back to look at the house. It was silent and dark again. But from where we stood, I could still see the gleam of metal tracks in the moonlight, running through the yard. "Did that just happen?" Matt asked, his voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We walked home in silence, separating at our usual corner without our typical jokes or goodbyes. I don't think any of us slept that night. The next day we met up after lunch and reluctantly agreed to go back in daylight. I don't know why, to prove to ourselves we'd imagined it, I guess, but when we got there and peered over the back fence, the tracks were gone. The yard was just an overgrown mess of weeds and grass, no sign that train tracks had ever been there. We never talked about it again after that day. It was like we made an unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. A few months later, my dad got a job in Brisbane, and we moved away. I lost touch with Jake and Matt over the years, but I couldn't let it go. When I was in university, I spent hours in the library looking up the history of that area in Cairns. I found out that before the suburb was built, the land had been part of a sugarcane farm owned by a man named William Kiernan. He was apparently a bit of a recluse who lived alone for decades before he disappeared in 1987. The farm was sold off and subdivided after he vanished. In an old local newspaper, I found an interview with Kiernan's neighbor from the 70s. The neighbor mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, Kiernan had this saying he'd repeat sometimes: "It ain't mine to leave, the train still runs, you just have to listen." I'm 33 now, I've got a job, a partner, a normal life, but sometimes, when I can't sleep, I find myself thinking about the Barrett family. Did they hear the whistle too? Did they follow the tracks to see where they led? And what about Kiernan before them? The most terrifying part is that sometimes, even now, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I've heard a distant train whistle. It sounds ridiculous in the light of day, but in those dark hours, I'm convinced that whatever took the Barretts is still out there, still running on those impossible tracks. And sometimes, I wonder if one night, I'll find those tracks appearing in my own backyard, leading me to whatever destination claimed them all. Story 4. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, ghost stories, hauntings, demonic possessions. They were always just campfire tales to me, not anymore. What happened to me last year on the USS Missouri changed everything, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. My fiancée Marie and I were stationed at Joint Base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. I was working as a maintenance tech and she was in communications. We'd been there about 8 months and were finally getting around to doing the touristy stuff. One weekend in May, we decided to visit Ford Island to see the USS Missouri. You know, the historic battleship where Japan formally surrendered at the end of World War II. We went with our friend Jake, who was also stationed at Pearl. It was a perfect day, clear blue skies, not too hot, the kind of day where nothing bad should happen. The ship was impressive, this massive gray beast sitting in the harbor. I remember looking up at it and feeling small. The three of us boarded along with about 20 other tourists and started the self-guided tour. Marie was really into the historical plaques and kept stopping to read everything, while Jake and I were more interested in checking out the gun turrets and the Combat Information Center. After about 45 minutes, Marie said she wanted to spend more time in the officers' quarters section, so we split up. Jake and I would explore the engine rooms and meet her back on the main deck in an hour. Jake and I headed down to the lower decks. It got noticeably cooler as we descended, and the passageways became narrower. The lighting changed too, dimmer with this yellowish tint that gave everything an aged look. We were checking out the massive boilers when I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the end of a corridor about 30 feet away was Marie. She was just standing there, looking at us. She wore the same outfit she had on that day, white shorts and a navy blue tank top. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, exactly like when we'd separated earlier. "Marie," I called out, confused about why she was down here. "I thought you were checking out the officers' quarters." She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at us with this blank expression. I remember feeling immediately uneasy, but I couldn't place why. "Hey, did you hear me?" I said, taking a couple steps toward her. Jake was right behind me, saying something about how weird it was that she'd found us all the way down here. That's when she smiled. It wasn't Marie's smile. It was wrong somehow. Too wide, too fixed. Her eyes didn't crinkle at the corners like they normally did. I glanced back at Jake to see if he noticed it too, just for a split second. When I looked back, she was gone. "Where did she go?" I asked, rushing forward. The corridor ended in a hatch that was closed and would have made a loud noise if opened. There were no side passages, no doorways she could have slipped through. She had literally vanished in the second I looked away. Jake was as confused as I was. "That was weird," he said. "Maybe we just thought we saw her." But we both knew what we'd seen. It had been Marie, or something that looked exactly like her, standing not 30 feet from us. And now she was gone. We searched the nearby areas, calling her name, but found nothing. Eventually, we made our way back up to the main deck, thoroughly spooked. When we found the real Marie, exactly where she said she'd be, examining the captain's quarters, my skin crawled. She'd never left the upper decks. There was no way she could have been in two places at once. "Did you come down to the engine room?" I asked her, already knowing the answer. She looked at me like I was crazy. "No, I've been up here the whole time." "Why?" I didn't tell her what we'd seen. I didn't want to freak her out, and honestly, I was trying to convince myself it had been some kind of weird shared hallucination, maybe a trick of the light or something. Jake and I exchanged glances, but silently agreed not to mention it. We finished the tour, had lunch at a nearby restaurant, and went home. I tried to put the incident out of my mind, just a strange occurrence, nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. About a week later, the nightmares started. Not just ordinary bad dreams. These were vivid, terrifying episodes that had me waking up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like it might burst from my chest. In these nightmares, I was always trapped in narrow corridors, being pursued by something I couldn't see but knew was there. And always, just before I woke up, I'd catch a glimpse of that wrong smile, that too wide, unnatural grin that looked like Marie's face but wasn't. The daytime wasn't much better. I started experiencing what I can only describe as day terrors. I'd be doing something completely normal, typing a report at work, washing dishes, driving, when suddenly I'd be overwhelmed by this crushing sense of dread. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, watching, waiting. I'd spin around, certain I'd catch someone there, but there was never anything to see. Marie noticed the change in me. "You're jumpy lately," she said one night as I nearly leaped out of my skin when she touched my shoulder from behind. "Is everything okay?" I lied and said I was just stressed about work. How could I explain that I felt like something was following me, that sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure that would disappear when I turned to look at it, that I was afraid to look in mirrors because I kept thinking I'd see that wrong smile reflected back at me. After 2 weeks of this, I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping. I could barely function at work. The constant feeling of being watched had me on edge every moment of every day. It was worst at night. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something was in the room with us. Sometimes I'd hear whispering, too faint to make out the words, but definitely there. One particularly bad night, after Marie had fallen asleep, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped, and I froze, unable to move or speak. A coldness spread across my body, starting from my feet and moving upward. When it reached my chest, I felt a pressure there, like something was sitting on me. I couldn't breathe. I tried to wake Marie, to call out, but no sound came. Just when I thought I might pass out, whatever it was lifted, and I could move again. I got up shaking and went to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, for just a split second, I swear I saw that smile behind me, that terrible, wrong smile. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The next day, I called Lana, a friend from the base who practiced Wicca. I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing before, but I was desperate. I told her everything, the apparition on the ship, the nightmares, the feeling of being watched and followed. Lana listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I think something attached itself to you on that ship, Ethan." Attached itself? The phrase made my skin crawl. Yes. Ships like the Missouri have seen a lot of death, a lot of suffering. Entities can linger in places like that. And sometimes, if you acknowledge them or interact with them in some way, they can follow you home. I remembered calling out to the thing I thought was Marie. Had that been enough to invite it in, Lana offered to do a tarot reading for me. I agreed, willing to try anything. She came over the next day when Marie was at work. I didn't want to involve Marie in this. She'd think I was losing my mind. Lana spread the cards on our kitchen table. As she turned them over one by one, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "There is definitely something with you," she said finally. "Something that attached itself to you on the ship. It's angry. It doesn't want to be detected." As she said this, the lights in the kitchen flickered. We both looked up, and I felt that familiar cold dread wash over me. "It knows we're talking about it," Lana whispered. That's when things got really scary. Over the next few days, I started having thoughts that weren't my own. Violent, disturbing thoughts. I'd look at Marie sleeping beside me and briefly imagine hurting her. I'd stand at the top of the stairs in our building and feel an urge to throw myself down them. These thoughts weren't mine. I would never harm Marie or myself. It was like something was planting these ideas in my head. I told Lana about these new developments, and she urged me to confront whatever it was. "You need to tell it to leave," she said. "Be firm. Let it know it's not welcome." That night, alone in our apartment while Marie was working the night shift, I decided to do just that. I stood in the middle of our living room and said, loudly and clearly, "Whatever you are, you need to leave. You're not welcome here. This is my life, my space, and I command you to go." The moment those words left my mouth, I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my right side, like someone had plunged a knife between my ribs. I doubled over, gasping. The pain was intense, but brief. When I lifted my shirt to check, there was no mark, no wound, just that lingering sensation of having been stabbed. I called Lana immediately. She came over and performed what she called a cleansing ritual. She burned sage, sprinkled salt in the corners of each room, and recited some kind of prayer or incantation. I didn't understand all of it, but I was beyond questioning at that point. When she finished, she gave me a small charm, a leather pouch filled with herbs and stones that she said would offer protection. "Keep this with you," she instructed. "Don't take it off." To my surprise, things did improve after that. The nightmares became less frequent. The feeling of being watched diminished. The violent thoughts receded. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, whatever had attached itself to me was gone, but it had left its mark. I'm different now. I can't watch horror movies anymore. They hit too close to home. I avoid reading about paranormal experiences when before I would have found them entertaining. And liminal spaces, those transitional areas like empty hallways, stairwells, or abandoned buildings, fill me with an irrational terror that I can't explain. I'm working at a furniture store in the Hickam Exchange complex now. It's a normal job, mundane even, but there's something about the place. Other employees have reported strange occurrences, items moving on their own, unexplained cold spots, the feeling of being watched. I feel it too. That same unease that began after the USS Missouri. It's not as intense, but it's there, lingering in the background. Marie and I are still together, still planning our wedding. I never told her the full extent of what happened. How do you tell someone you love that you saw their doppelganger on a historic battleship and it followed you home? Sometimes when I'm alone, I still feel that presence. It's fainter now, more distant, but not entirely gone. And occasionally, just as I'm falling asleep, I think I hear a whisper, too quiet to make out the words. I clutch Lana's charm tighter and try to ignore it. I don't know what it was that attached itself to me that day on the USS Missouri. I don't know if it's truly gone or just biding its time. All I know is that it changed me, showed me that there are things in this world we can't explain, things beyond our understanding. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if part of it is still with me, watching, waiting, wearing that terrible wrong smile. Story 5. I never wanted to share this publicly, but I've reached a breaking point. It's been going on too long, and last night was the worst it's ever been. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I just need answers. I'm 20 years old now, and we moved into my grandfather's rental property back in 2012 when I was 12. It's nothing fancy, a house from the 80s with 3 separate units. We took one of the basement suites because my parents couldn't afford much else after Dad lost his job. I remember being excited about having my own room after sharing with my sister for years. That excitement didn't last long. The very first night in my new bedroom, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I woke up, or at least I thought I was awake, but couldn't move. There was this man standing at the foot of my bed. He was middle-aged, wearing a white t-shirt and black pants, but where his head should have been, there was nothing, just empty space. I tried to scream but couldn't. I tried to move but couldn't. I just laid there frozen, watching this headless figure slowly walk around my bed. When I finally broke free from whatever was holding me down, I ran to my parents' room crying. They told me it was just a nightmare, just stress from the move. I wanted to believe them, but it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Sometimes the headless man would be there. Other times it would be a woman, thin, middle-aged, with long black hair that hung in front of her face. She never did anything, just stood there staring at me. I could feel her eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them through her hair. My parents got me to a doctor who diagnosed night terrors and sleep paralysis. They said it would probably go away once I got used to the new place. It didn't. For years I've dealt with these episodes. Sometimes they'd happen less frequently, maybe once a month instead of every night, but they never completely stopped. I tried everything: nightlights, sleeping with my door open, music playing softly, meditation before bed. Nothing worked. About 6 months ago, things started getting worse, way worse. It started with the break-in. Someone smashed our basement window and rummaged through our stuff. They didn't take much, just some cash and my mom's costume jewelry. But it left us all feeling violated. My dad installed security cameras the next day, one by the back door, one pointing at my bedroom window, since that's where they broke in, and one covering the front entrance. That's when things got really weird. About a week after installing the cameras, my dad was checking the footage and found something disturbing. There was a man standing in our garden at 3 in the morning, just staring at my window for hours. Not moving, not doing anything, just standing there. The footage was grainy, but he was wearing what looked like a white shirt. My dad called the police, but by the time they came to check it out, there was nothing on the camera from the previous night. 2 days later, the camera pointing at my window fell off its mount. My dad reinstalled it, making sure it was secure. The next morning, it was on the ground again, lens cracked. He replaced it with a new one. That one lasted 3 days before we found it smashed to pieces on the garden path. We stopped replacing that particular camera. Around this time, I started hearing knocking on my window at night. Loud, deliberate knocking. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. The first time it happened, I thought it was tree branches, but we don't have trees close enough to the house to reach my window. The second time, I called my dad. By the time he came in, the knocking had stopped. He checked outside with a flashlight, but found nothing. The doorbell started ringing by itself. We'd all be sitting in the living room and suddenly, ding dong. We'd check, but no one would be there. This happened at random times, day and night. Sometimes it would ring once, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a row. Our dog, Max, who used to love being in the backyard, now refuses to go outside. He stands at the door whimpering, and if we try to push him out, he yelps like he's being hurt. He started sleeping pressed up against my bedroom door at night, which is both comforting and terrifying. Small things started disappearing. My hairbrush would be on my dresser when I went to shower, and when I came back, it would be gone. I'd find it hours later in the kitchen drawer or under the couch. My keys would vanish from the hook by the door and turn up in the bathroom cabinet. My mom's reading glasses disappeared for a week and then suddenly reappeared on her nightstand, even though she'd checked there dozens of times. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, started having the same nightmares I did. She described the headless man and the woman with long hair without me ever telling her about them. She moved her mattress into our parents' room after that. I tried to stick it out in my room. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But last night, I can't explain away. I was lying in bed around 12:30, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself enough to fall asleep. Max was in his usual spot against my door, which was closed. Suddenly, I heard the door handle turn. The door opened slowly, just a few inches, and Max didn't react at all. He should have at least lifted his head, but he just stayed asleep. I sat up, expecting to see my mom checking on me, but there was no one there, just the door, now slightly ajar. I called out, "Mom?" No answer. I got up to close it, thinking maybe it hadn't latched properly. As soon as my feet hit the floor, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. It had been a warm June night, but suddenly I could see my breath. I quickly got back in bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. That's when I felt it, the overwhelming sense that someone was watching me. Not just watching, but standing right next to my bed. I could feel their presence as clearly as if they had tapped me on the shoulder. Then I heard breathing. Not my breathing. I was holding my breath in fear. This was deep, raspy breathing coming from right beside my bed. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. But the breathing continued. For an hour, I lay there, listening to someone breathe next to me while I stared at empty space. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just lay there, tears running down my face, wondering if I was finally losing my mind. Around 1:30, the breathing stopped. The room slowly warmed back up. I still didn't move until morning light started filtering through my curtains. When I finally got up, exhausted and terrified, I found my dad in the kitchen. I told him what happened, expecting him to dismiss it as another nightmare. Instead, he looked troubled and admitted that he'd been hearing strange noises at night too, footsteps in the hallway when everyone was in bed, whispering from empty rooms. My mom overheard us and confessed she'd been finding the kitchen cabinets open every morning, despite closing them the night before. Last weekend, my cousin stayed over. She slept on the couch in the living room and asked me the next morning if someone in our family sleepwalks. When I asked why, she said someone had been walking around the living room all night, moving things around. She'd assumed it was one of us. We had some other friends over for dinner a few weeks ago, and one of them asked, completely unprompted, if our doorbell was broken because it had rung twice while we were all sitting at the table. It's not just me. It's not in my head. Whatever is in this house is real, and it's getting bolder. I've researched the history of the property, trying to find out if something happened here. My grandfather bought it in the 90s as an investment, but before that, I can't find any information. I asked him if he knew anything about previous owners, but he just shrugged and said the place was empty for years before he bought it. The woman with the black hair and the headless man, who are they? Why are they here? Why are they focused on me? And was that man in our garden a real person or something else? I'm writing this from a coffee shop because I can't stand being in that house during the day anymore. I have to go back tonight because I have nowhere else to go. My parents don't want to break the lease and can't afford to move right now. They keep saying it'll get better, but it's getting worse. I'm terrified of what might be waiting for me when I get home. I'm terrified of going to sleep tonight. Most of all, I'm terrified that whatever is in that house is getting stronger, more aggressive, and I don't know what to do. Story 6. I can't believe I'm finally typing this out. I've kept this bottled up for over 20 years, only telling a few close friends who usually just laugh it off. But I need to get this out there, even if no one believes me. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. This happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old. We were living in Istanbul at the time because of my dad's job with an international company. We had this small apartment in an older building, nothing fancy, just a regular place with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen that always smelled like my mom's cooking. I shared a room with my little sister, who was 4 at the time. We had this wooden bunk bed that creaked whenever either of us moved. I always slept on the top bunk because I was older, and honestly, I loved being up high. My sister was afraid of heights, so she was happy with the bottom bunk. Our room wasn't very big, just enough space for the bunk bed, a small dresser, and a toy box in the corner. Mom had put up these pale yellow curtains that were always billowing slightly from the draft that came through the old windows. We always slept with this small nightlight plugged into the wall socket. It was shaped like a crescent moon and cast this soft bluish glow across the room. Just enough to see outlines of furniture, but not bright enough to keep us awake. My sister couldn't sleep without it, and honestly, I was glad we had it too. That night started like any other. Mom tucked us in around 8:30, kissed our foreheads, and reminded us not to stay up talking like we sometimes did. I remember I was wearing my favorite pajamas, the blue ones with little white stars all over them. I had school the next day, so I was trying to fall asleep quickly, but my mind was racing with thoughts about a science project we were working on. I don't know exactly what time it was when it happened. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but I'd been lying there for a while, just staring at the ceiling and listening to my sister's soft breathing below me. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a car passing on the street below and the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I rolled onto my side, facing the doorway, hoping that changing positions would help me drift off. That's when I saw her. There was a woman standing in the doorway, not my mom, not anyone I recognized. She was tall and unnaturally broad-shouldered, like she was wearing thick padding under her clothes. Her skin was this sickly grayish color that looked almost blue in the nightlight's glow. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white dress, but it wasn't white anymore, more of a dirty yellowish color, like an old newspaper. The dress went all the way down to the floor, and I couldn't see her feet. But what really terrified me was her hair. It was jet black and hung straight down, completely covering her face. Not a single feature was visible through that curtain of dark hair. It was so long it reached past her waist. She just stood there at first, perfectly still in the doorway. I thought maybe I was dreaming, so I blinked hard, but when I opened my eyes, she was still there. Then, slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, she started walking into our room. She didn't walk normally. Each step was deliberate and stiff, like her knees couldn't bend properly. There was no sound when she moved, no footsteps, no rustling of her dress, nothing. Just this eerie silence that seemed to make everything else in the room fade away. I couldn't scream. I tried, but my voice was trapped somewhere in my chest. My whole body felt ice cold and heavy, like I was sinking into the mattress. I couldn't even move my fingers. All I could do was watch as she came closer to the bunk bed. When she was about halfway across the room, my survival instinct finally kicked in. I managed to move enough to pull my duvet over my head, but I kept my eyes open, peering out through a tiny opening. I was trembling so hard the whole bed frame was shaking slightly, but my sister didn't wake up. I could still see the woman through that small gap in my covers. She stopped right next to the bunk bed, so close that if I had reached out, I could have touched her. For what felt like forever, she just stood there, facing me. I couldn't see her breathing. I couldn't hear anything from her at all. Then she did something that still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. She slowly raised her arms. Her hands were pale and had unnaturally long fingers, and reached for my duvet. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as those gray fingers gripped the edge of my covers and began to lift them away from me. As the duvet moved, I caught a glimpse of what was behind that hair. There was nothing, just darkness where a face should have been. I slammed my eyes shut then, harder than I've ever closed them before or since. My heart was pounding so violently, I thought it might explode in my chest. My grandmother had taught me that saying Bismillah, which means in the name of Allah, would protect me from evil things. So I started repeating it over and over again, my lips barely moving, my voice just a whisper. Bismillah, Bismillah, Bismillah. I kept my eyes shut tight and just kept saying it, feeling tears leaking out from my closed eyelids and running down my cheeks. I don't know how many times I repeated it, dozens, maybe hundreds of times, before I finally found the courage to open my eyes again. She was gone. The duvet was still pulled back where she had lifted it, but there was no sign of the woman. I sat up quickly and looked around the room, my heart still racing. She wasn't hiding in any corner. She wasn't standing by the door. She was just gone. I was too terrified to call out for my parents. What if making a sound brought her back? What if she was still somewhere in the apartment waiting? So I just sat there, rigid with fear, my back pressed against the wall, watching the doorway. I didn't move an inch. I didn't even dare to reach down and pull my duvet back up, even though I was shivering uncontrollably. I stayed like that all night. My eyes burned from staying open so long, but I was too afraid to close them. Every shadow, every slight movement of the curtains made my heart jump. I kept expecting her to reappear, to see that mass of black hair and gray skin emerging from the darkness again. I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion just before dawn. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and my sister was already out of bed, playing with her toys on the floor. It felt like I'd had a terrible nightmare, except the duvet was still pulled back exactly how the woman had left it. At breakfast, I tried to tell my mom what happened. She just smiled and patted my head, telling me I had an active imagination and had probably been dreaming. My dad was even less interested, barely looking up from his newspaper to tell me to stop making up stories. My sister said she hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. No one believed me. Not that day, not ever. I refused to sleep in that room for weeks. I'd make excuses to fall asleep on the couch, or I'd sneak into my parents' room and sleep on the floor beside their bed. Eventually, they got frustrated and forced me to go back to my own bed. I begged them to let me sleep with the lights fully on, but they wouldn't allow it, just the same dim nightlight as before. Every night after that, I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the doorway, waiting for her to return. I kept a flashlight under my pillow and would whisper Bismillah to myself until I finally drifted off to sleep. But she never came back. We moved away from Istanbul when I was 9, and I thought I'd left that experience behind. But even now, as an adult with my own apartment and a rational mind, I still can't sleep facing the doorway. I always position my bed so my back is to the wall. I still sleep with a small light on, and sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I catch myself whispering Bismillah under my breath. The most disturbing part? About 5 years ago, I was helping my parents clean out their attic and found some old photos from our time in Istanbul. In one picture of our apartment building taken from the street, there's a window on the 3rd floor, our floor, and what looks like a figure standing there. It's blurry and dark, but I can make out what appears to be a woman in white with long dark hair. My parents insist it's just a curtain or a shadow, but I know better. I've researched Turkish folklore since then, trying to make sense of what I saw. There are stories about spirits called al-karısı that visit people at night, but none of the descriptions match what I experienced. Whatever visited me that night wasn't part of any folklore I can find. It was something else. I've never seen her again, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I get this feeling of being watched, and sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I think I catch a whiff of something musty and old, like yellowed fabric that's been stored away for decades. When that happens, I find myself saying Bismillah again, just in case. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I've spent years trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare or a child's overactive imagination. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. That woman, that thing, was in my room that night. And sometimes I wonder if she's still out there somewhere, walking with those stiff, silent steps, looking for another child's room to visit. Story 7. I've never shared this before, but I need to get it off my chest. 20 years later, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 8 years old when my family moved to Pineville. My parents were excited about the character of our new house, an old two-story place that the real estate agent said dated back to the early 1800s. Mom loved the history, the weird layout with all these additions tacked on over the decades. Dad was just happy about the price. Looking back, I should have known something was off the moment we walked in. The house had this smell, not musty exactly, but wrong, like the air was too thick. Everyone else seemed fine with it, so I didn't say anything. What did I know? I was just a kid. The layout was bizarre. The original part of the house had the dining room and living room, with these ancient windows that now faced into newer rooms that had been added on both sides. Basically, you could look through the original windows of the house, but instead of seeing outside, you'd be looking into another room. It gave me the creeps from day one, but my parents thought it was architectural character. 2 rectangular rooms had been added to the sides with modern windows facing the yard. The whole place was a patchwork of different eras. We'd been there about 3 weeks when I noticed the first scratch. I was getting ready for bed, pulling my shirt off, when I saw 3 long, thin marks across my side. They weren't deep, but they stung when I touched them. I figured I'd scraped against something at school or while playing outside and hadn't noticed. The next morning, my sister Emma, she was 10, was complaining at breakfast about scratches on her arm. Mom looked at them and asked if she'd been playing rough with Midnight, our cat. Midnight was sitting in the windowsill, watching us with those intense green eyes. He was a big black cat, super protective of us kids. Emma shook her head, saying she hadn't even seen Midnight the night before. Over the next few days, both Emma and I kept finding these scratches, always in places covered by clothing, never on our hands or faces, sometimes on our backs where we couldn't even reach ourselves. Mom started getting annoyed, thinking we were scratching each other or ourselves for attention. But why would we do that? And how could I scratch my own back? One night, I woke up around 3 in the morning needing to pee. As I was walking back from the bathroom, I saw something that made me freeze, a shadow on the wall. Not my shadow. This was taller, thinner, and it wasn't moving with me. I stood completely still, holding my breath, and the shadow moved slightly, like it was turning its head. I ran back to my room and dove under the covers, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. At breakfast the next day, I was too scared to mention it. But Emma looked tired, and when Mom asked her what was wrong, she whispered, "I saw a shadow in my room last night." My stomach dropped. Before she could say more, Dad interrupted, explaining that car headlights from the road probably cast shadows through the windows. He was always the practical one, always had an explanation. I wanted to believe him. For a while, that's what we did, blamed everything on headlights, the cat, old house noises. The scratches were harder to explain, especially when they started appearing on nights when Midnight hadn't even been in the house. He'd started spending more time outdoors, hunting all night, coming back only in the morning with a mouse or bird as a gift. About 2 months after moving in, Emma had her friend Lily over. They were sitting at the dining room table playing cards. I was on the floor nearby, messing with my action figures. Suddenly, Lily's face went completely white. Without saying anything, she got up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a butter knife. She sat back down, holding the knife in her lap. "What are you doing?" Emma asked. Lily's voice was shaking. "There's someone looking at us." We all turned to where she was staring, one of those old interior windows, the ones that used to be exterior before the additions were built. The room on the other side was dark. "What do you mean?" Emma asked. "There was a face," Lily whispered, "looking through the window at us, but from inside the house." My dad came in then, asking what was going on. Lily wouldn't say anything else about it, but she insisted on calling her mom to pick her up early. She never came over again. After that, things escalated. Midnight started acting strange. He'd patrol the house at night, growling at empty corners, his back arched and fur standing on end. Sometimes he'd just sit and stare at a blank wall for hours, occasionally hissing. When we tried to move him, he'd growl without taking his eyes off whatever he was seeing that we couldn't. My brother Jake, he was 13, claimed it was just midnight sensing animals outside. But we never saw any animals when we looked. And Midnight was an indoor-outdoor cat. He knew what raccoons and possums sounded and smelled like. This was different. The scratches kept appearing too, getting longer and deeper. Once, Emma woke up with scratches on her stomach so bad that Mum took her to the doctor. The doctor said they looked like cat scratches, but Midnight had been outside all night. Dad had let him out before dinner, and he hadn't come back until morning. I started sleeping with my light on. I'd see the shadows more frequently now, tall, thin shapes moving across my walls, sometimes pausing as if watching me. I'd pull the covers over my head and count to 100, hoping they'd be gone when I looked again. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. One Saturday afternoon in November, about 5 months after we'd moved in, Jake had his friend Chris over. They were playing video games in the living room while I watched. Mom and Dad had taken Emma shopping for new shoes. I remember it was raining, a cold autumn rain that made the old house creak and groan more than usual. Chris and Jake were arguing about whose turn it was when Chris suddenly jumped up from the couch like he'd been shocked. "Oh, hell no," he shouted, backing toward the door. His face had that same pale, terrified look that Lily's had. "What?" Jake asked, laughing nervously. "What's wrong with you?" Chris pointed toward the hallway that led to the bathroom and the back bedroom. "Did you see that? Tell me you saw that." Jake and I both looked, but saw nothing. The hallway was empty. "There was something there," Chris insisted, his voice cracking. "Like I don't know, like a tall cat but walking on 2 legs. It came out of the bathroom and went into your parents' bedroom." Jake tried to laugh it off, but Chris wasn't having it. He grabbed his jacket and said he was leaving. Rain or no rain, he practically ran out the door. Like Lily, he never came back to our house. That night, the scratches were the worst they'd ever been. I woke up around midnight, feeling like my back was on fire. When I went to the bathroom and twisted around to look in the mirror, I saw 3 deep, parallel scratches running from my shoulder blade to my waist. They were bleeding slightly. I started crying, not from the pain, but from fear. I went to my parents' room, still crying. Mom turned on the light and gasped when she saw my back. Dad got the first aid kit and cleaned the scratches while I tried to explain that I didn't know how it happened, that I was just sleeping. "It had to be midnight," Dad insisted, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Midnight's outside," Mom said quietly. "Has been all evening." That night, I slept in their room, on a makeshift bed of blankets on the floor. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of Midnight howling outside the bedroom door. Not his normal meow, but a horrible, guttural sound I'd never heard him make before. Dad got up to check, and when he opened the door, Midnight shot into the room and under the bed, where he stayed until morning, growling softly. The next day, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed voices in the kitchen. Mom wanted to call someone, a priest or something. Dad thought that was ridiculous. He was blaming the scratches on some kind of allergic reaction, the shadows on our overactive imaginations, and Midnight's behavior on animals we couldn't see. But something changed that day. I saw it in Dad's eyes at dinner. He kept looking at the old windows, at the dark corners of the dining room. He'd seen something too, I realized. He just wasn't saying what. 2 nights later, it all came to a head. We were all asleep when a crash woke us up. It came from the living room, the sound of breaking glass. Dad grabbed his baseball bat and went downstairs, with Mom right behind him. Emma, Jake, and I huddled at the top of the stairs, too scared to follow but too curious to stay in our rooms. We heard Dad swear, then Mom gasping, then silence. "What is it?" Jake called down. "Stay upstairs." Dad's voice sounded strange, tight. Of course we didn't listen. We crept down to see what had happened. The large mirror that hung over the living room fireplace had somehow fallen and shattered, but that wasn't what had shocked our parents into silence. Written in the dust on the fireplace brick, clear as day, were 3 words: "Get out now." No one had been near that fireplace in weeks. It was November, but the old fireplace didn't work, and Dad had installed central heating. We moved out the next day, just packed what we needed, and went to a hotel. Dad called a moving company to get the rest of our stuff later. We never spent another night in that house. Years later, when I asked my parents about it, they would only say the house wasn't right for us. Dad still won't admit what he saw that made him finally believe. Mom just changes the subject. I've tried researching the house's history, but records from that time in Pineville are spotty. All I know is that 3 different families lived there after us, and none stayed longer than 7 months. I still have 3 faint scars on my back. Doctors have said they look like animal scratches, but I know better. Whatever was in that house, it wasn't an animal, at least not entirely, and it didn't want us there. Sometimes I still dream about those interior windows and the feeling of being watched from inside my own home. I'll wake up with my heart racing, certain I've seen a tall, thin shadow in the corner of my bedroom, or feeling phantom scratches forming on my skin. I don't know what was in that house. I don't want to know. All I know is that 20 years later, I still sleep with the light on. Story 8. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night. I was 9 years old when it occurred, and even though it's been years, I remember every detail like it was yesterday. We lived in this old house in Millfield, a real creaky place that settled and made noises even on the calmest days. It was one of those houses with character, my mum would say. Translation, it was old, had weird drafts and made scary noises at night. The wooden floors would groan under your feet, and the stairs, those damn stairs, would announce anyone's presence with a symphony of creaks. That particular night, Mom was working the late shift at the hospital. She was a nurse and often had to work overnight, leaving us with our stepfather, Rick. It was me, Eliza, and my 2 younger brothers, Tommy, who was 7, and Ben, who was 5. Rick wasn't a bad guy, just kind of awkward around us sometimes. He'd been our stepdad for about 2 years, but there was still this invisible wall between us. It was mid-October, and the night had that crisp fall feeling. We'd been watching TV in the living room, some stupid cartoon that the boys loved. Rick had been trying to get us to go to bed for almost an hour. Our bedrooms were in the basement, which I always hated. It was partially finished, but still felt like, well, a basement. Cold concrete floors in some areas, those drop ceiling tiles in others, and this persistent smell of laundry detergent mixed with something musty. Come on, guys, it's almost 10. Your mom's gonna kill me if you're still up when she gets home, Rick said for probably the 5th time, standing in the doorway between the living room and kitchen. Just 5 more minutes, Tommy begged, not taking his eyes off the TV. That's when we heard it. The first creak came from the bottom step of the staircase that led from the 1st floor up to the 2nd floor, where nobody was supposed to be. It was a distinctive sound, one we all knew well. Each step in our house had its own voice, and that bottom one had the loudest creak of all. I remember exchanging looks with Rick. At first, he had this annoyed expression like he thought one of us had sneaked upstairs, but we were all right there in the living room. What was that? I asked, muting the TV. Probably just the house settling, Rick said, but I could tell by the way his eyes darted toward the staircase that he didn't believe it. Then came the 2nd creak. Slower this time, deliberate, like someone was putting their full weight on the step, then slowly lifting it again. The 3rd step had a different sound, more of a groan than a creak. We heard that next. Rick walked over to the bottom of the staircase and looked up. "Hello?" he called out, his voice steady but a little too loud. No response. "Stay here," he told us and started up the stairs. I remember clutching Tommy's shoulder as Rick made it up about 4 steps. The creaking stopped while he was on the stairs. He reached the landing, looked around, then continued up and out of our sight. A few minutes later, he came back down. "There's nobody up there. All the rooms are empty." I was about to suggest we call Mom when we heard it again. The bottom step, creaking. But Rick was standing right next to us now. What made it so terrifying wasn't just the sound itself. It was the pace. Slow, methodical. like an elderly person carefully making their way up, one laborious step at a time. And then there was the railing, the old wooden banister that ran along the staircase. We could hear the distinct sound of weight being placed on it, the wood slightly groaning, then releasing as the invisible weight moved up another step. "Rick?" Ben whimpered, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Rick's face had gone pale. "It's nothing, buddy. Just the house." But his voice cracked, betraying his fear. By this point, the creaking had made it about a quarter of the way up the stairs. Fourth step, fifth step, each with its own unique sound that we all recognized. "Maybe we should go to the basement," I suggested, thinking our bedrooms might be safer somehow. Rick nodded quickly. "Good idea. Let's all go downstairs for a bit." But as we stood up to leave, the creaking paused. Then, to our horror, it changed direction. It started coming back down, slow, deliberate, like whatever it was had heard our plan and was coming to intercept us. "The back door," Rick whispered urgently. "We'll go out the back door and around to the basement entrance." Our house had this weird layout. The basement had its own external entrance on the side of the house, with metal doors that slanted up from the ground like an old storm cellar. We started moving toward the kitchen, which led to the back door, when the creaking suddenly stopped. For about 10 seconds, there was complete silence. Then it started again, faster this time, heading up the stairs with purpose. Rick ushered us into the kitchen, his hand on Ben's shoulder, pushing him gently forward. I was last in line, and I couldn't help looking back toward the staircase. I wish I hadn't. The stairs were empty. But the railing, I swear I saw the railing move, just slightly, like someone was gripping it, putting weight on it as they climbed. When we reached the back door, Rick tried to open it, but it was stuck, not locked, stuck, like something was holding it closed from the other side. "Front door," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We turned around, but froze when we heard what sounded like someone reaching the top of the stairs. The last step always made this distinct double creak, one when you stepped on it and another when you stepped off onto the second floor landing. We heard both, then silence again, until the screen doors started. Our house had 3 screen doors, front, back, and side. All at once they began opening and slamming shut. Open, slam, open, slam, over and over, in perfect rhythm, like someone was walking around the entire house, entering and exiting each door in turn. But there was no wind, no storm, just a still October night and 3 doors slamming with enough force to make the windows rattle. Tommy started crying and Ben buried his face in Rick's shirt. I stood there frozen, unable to look away from the front hallway where I could see our front screen door opening and slamming shut, over and over. "What's happening?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange and far away to my own ears. Rick didn't answer. He just gathered us all into a tight huddle in the corner of the kitchen, as far from the doors and the staircase as possible. The slamming continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, all 3 doors, at exactly the same moment. And then we heard the footsteps again, but this time they were upstairs, moving across the ceiling above us. Slow, shuffling steps, back and forth, back and forth. "It's just the pipes," Rick said, his voice trembling. "Old houses make noises." But we all knew it wasn't the pipes. The footsteps were too deliberate, too measured. They moved in patterns that pipes and settling houses don't make. At one point they stopped right above where we were huddled, like whatever it was knew exactly where we were. Then came the scratching, light at first, then more insistent, like fingernails dragging across the ceiling floor right above our heads. Ben started sobbing, and I wasn't far behind. Even Rick looked terrified now, his attempt at being the calm adult completely abandoned. "We need to leave," I whispered. Rick nodded. "On 3, we run for the front door. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, all the lights in the house went out, not like a power outage. They dimmed first, flickered, then faded to darkness. The only light came from the moonlight through the windows. In the new darkness, the footsteps upstairs stopped. We sat in silence, barely breathing, straining to hear any sound. Then we heard it, the top step creaking. Whatever was upstairs was coming back down. I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps descending. Slow, heavy, deliberate, the railing creaking under invisible hands. About halfway down, they stopped again. And then, from upstairs, we heard a door slam, then another, then another. Every door in the upstairs hallway slamming shut one after another, in perfect sequence from one end of the hall to the other. The boys were crying openly now, and I was shaking uncontrollably. Rick had his arms around all three of us, and I could feel him trembling too. "Great-grandma," Tommy suddenly whispered. My blood went cold. Our great-grandmother had died just 3 weeks earlier. She was 92 and had been sick for a long time. She wasn't exactly the warm, cookie-baking type of great-grandma either. She'd been stern, sometimes mean, especially in her final years as dementia took hold. "What about her?" Rick asked, his voice barely audible. "She used to climb those stairs really slow," Tommy said. "Remember how she'd grip the railing and it would make that exact same noise?" He was right. Great-grandma had lived with us for a few months before going into a nursing home. She'd struggled with those stairs, taking them one at a time, leaning heavily on the railing which would groan under her weight. As if responding to Tommy's realization, the footsteps suddenly resumed, but now they were moving faster, almost running down the rest of the stairs. The final step made its distinctive double creak, and then we heard footsteps crossing the hallway, heading straight for the kitchen where we were huddled. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see whatever was about to come through that doorway. The footsteps stopped right at the kitchen entrance. We could hear breathing, labored, like someone who had just exerted themselves, and then nothing. Complete silence fell over the house. The lights flickered back on. The doors stopped slamming. The footsteps disappeared. We stayed huddled in that corner until Mom came home at 4 in the morning. She found us all asleep in a pile, Rick still with his arms protectively around us. When we told her what happened, she looked shocked, but not exactly surprised. She sat down at the kitchen table and told us something she'd been keeping to herself. 2 nights earlier, she'd been asleep in bed when something smacked her wrist, hard enough to wake her up. It was exactly the way Great-grandma used to wake her when she was a kid. A sharp smack on the wrist that Great-grandma found amusing, but Mom had always hated. A week after our experience, my grandfather, a man who'd spent his entire life scoffing at ghost stories, reluctantly admitted that he'd seen Great-grandma standing in the corner of his bedroom the night after her funeral, just watching him with that stern expression she always had. We moved out of that house 2 months later. Mom claimed it was because the place was too big for us to maintain, but I knew the real reason. None of us ever felt comfortable there again. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I know what I heard, what I felt. And sometimes, when I visit my mom's new house and accidentally make a floorboard creak, I freeze, just for a second, waiting to hear if something creaks back. Story 9. I've never told this story in full before, but I need to get it off my chest. What I experienced as a child in our Minneapolis apartment still gives me chills 20 years later. I was only 4 years old when it first happened. I remember lying in my bed during nap time, stubbornly refusing to sleep. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the heater. We lived in a converted ice storage building, one of those old industrial spaces with high ceilings and exposed brick that had been transformed into family apartments. I was just lying there, staring at the ceiling, when I heard my mom's voice. "Samantha," she called, clear as day. "Samantha, come here." I hopped out of bed and followed her voice to her bedroom, expecting to find her folding laundry or something. But when I pushed the door open, she looked up from her book with this confused expression. "What's up, sweetie?" she asked. "You called me," I said. Mom put her book down. "No, I didn't." I insisted that I'd heard her call my name, but she just shook her head and told me to go back to my room and try to nap. I remember walking back to my bedroom feeling really unsettled. I was young, but I knew what I'd heard. That was just the beginning. I lived in that apartment until I was 18, and during those years, that place never felt right. The weird stuff happened so frequently that it became almost normal, though I never got used to it. I just learned to live with it. The bathroom incidents were the most consistent. Our apartment had this long hallway with a bathroom halfway down. Whenever I had to use it at night, I'd hear footsteps outside the door, distinctly high heels clicking on the hardwood floors. Click, clack, back and forth. It sounded like a woman pacing impatiently, waiting for me to finish. The first few times, I rushed out to see who it was, thinking maybe Mum had gotten up too, but no one was ever there, and Mum didn't even own high heels like that. After a while, I started announcing when I needed to use the bathroom at night. "I'm just going to pee," I'd say out loud, feeling ridiculous but desperate. "I'll only be a minute." Sometimes that would make the pacing stop, other times it didn't. The touching started when I was around 7. I'd be doing homework or playing with toys in my room when I'd feel a hand on my shoulder or the back of my neck. It wasn't gentle. It felt like a man's hand, rough and cold. I'd spin around, but no one would be there. My skin would tingle for minutes afterward. The weird thing was, I never felt the man's touch when I heard the high heels. It's like they couldn't be in the same place at the same time. After a while, I started to think of them as separate entities, the woman in heels and the man with rough hands. In my mind, the woman was protecting me from the man. I know that sounds crazy, but when you live with this stuff, you start creating explanations just to cope. I never told my parents the full extent of what was happening. My dad worked nights at the hospital, so he was rarely home during the worst of it. And Mom, well, whenever I mentioned anything weird, she'd get this strained look on her face. Once when I was about 9, I worked up the courage to tell her about the man touching me, and she got so upset that she called a priest to bless our apartment while Dad was at work. It didn't help, and Dad was pissed when he found out because he thought religious stuff was nonsense. They argued about it for days. After that, I kept most of it to myself. The man seemed to get more aggressive as I got older. When I was 12, I was sitting on my bed reading when my big 90s-style headphones, the bulky kind with the foam ear pads, suddenly flew off my dresser and landed at my feet. They didn't just fall, they launched across the room like someone had thrown them. I remember staring at them, my heart pounding, trying to come up with some logical explanation. Was there a draft? Did a truck drive by and shake the building? But I knew better. Another time, I had this wooden chair in the corner of my room. Sometimes at night, I'd hear it creak, like someone was sitting in it. The first few times, I turned on my light, but it was always empty. Eventually, I just started sleeping with my back to that corner of the room. The bathroom incidents continued throughout my teens. The clicking heels became so familiar that I almost expected them. Sometimes if I was feeling particularly brave or stupid, I'd talk to her through the door. "Hey, I know you're there," I'd whisper. The pacing would stop immediately, but I never got a response. The creepiest incident happened when I was 15. It was summer break, and I was up late listening to the radio, one of those call-in request shows that used to be popular. It must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning. My room was dark except for the glow of the radio display. I was just lying there, half listening to some love song, when I felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, but suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer door right next to my bed. I sat up, and that's when I saw them at the foot of my bed. 2 children holding hands, a boy who looked about 9 and a smaller girl, maybe 6. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, the boy in short pants with suspenders, and the girl in a high-waisted dress with puffy sleeves. But what really freaked me out was that they were completely gray, like an old black and white photo, but 3-dimensional. They weren't transparent, they looked solid, but they were entirely gray, from their clothes to their skin to their eyes. I remember my mouth going dry. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. They just stood there staring at me with these sad expressions. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, I managed to whisper, "Hello?" As soon as I spoke, they started to fade. getting dimmer and dimmer until they disappeared completely. The room warmed up immediately after they were gone. I sat there for hours, too terrified to sleep, convinced they'd come back. They never did, at least not when I was awake, but sometimes I'd wake up in the morning feeling like someone had been watching me all night. I never saw the woman in heels or the man with rough hands, but I felt their presence constantly. The woman seemed to stay mainly in the hallway, while the man moved throughout the apartment. My bedroom and the bathroom seemed to be his favorite spots. When I was 16, things escalated. Objects started moving more frequently, not just being thrown but relocated. I'd leave my school books on my desk and find them stacked by my door in the morning. My hairbrush would go missing for days, then reappear in my sock drawer. Once all the magnets on our refrigerator were arranged in a perfect circle when I got home from school. Mom noticed these things too, but always found some logical explanation. She'd moved things while cleaning, or I was sleepwalking, or the building was settling in weird ways. I think she knew something was off but couldn't face it. Dad never experienced anything, or if he did, he never mentioned it. The most physical encounter happened when I was 17. I was alone in the apartment getting ready for bed when I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor in the living room. I froze, toothbrush in hand, listening. It stopped, then started again, a heavy scraping sound. I crept down the hallway and peeked around the corner. The coffee table was moving, not sliding but lifting slightly on one end and dropping, lifting and dropping, like someone was trying to flip it over but couldn't quite manage it. I watched, paralyzed, as it rose about 6 inches off the floor, hovered for a moment, then crashed down. I ran back to my room, locked the door, and called my friend Kate. I was hysterical, but she calmed me down and stayed on the phone until my parents got home an hour later. When they arrived, the coffee table was back in its normal position. Dad checked the whole apartment, but found nothing. Mom sat with me and made me chamomile tea, but I could tell she was unsettled too. It wasn't until years later that I discovered something that made sense of at least part of what I'd experienced. I was visiting a college friend who lived near my old building, and we ran into one of the longtime residents in the elevator. We got talking and I mentioned I grew up there. "Which floor?" he asked. "8th," I replied. His face changed. "Apartment 803? When I nodded, he looked uncomfortable. "Did your parents ever tell you about what happened there?" Apparently, about a year before my family moved in, a man had climbed over the railing in the central open space of the building, right in front of what would become our apartment door, and jumped to his death. He'd been depressed after losing his job at the factory that had once occupied the building before it was converted to apartments. I felt sick hearing this. The man with rough hands. Had that been him? Had he been trying to communicate something to me all those years? I thought about the touches, the moving objects, the aggression. It made a horrible kind of sense. But what about the woman in heels and the children? I never did find out who they might have been. The building was over 100 years old, originally built in the early 1900s. Who knows how many lives had passed through those walls before mine? I'm 28 now and live in a modern apartment building in Chicago. Nothing weird has ever happened here. No footsteps, no touches, no moving objects, but I still can't use the bathroom at night without expecting to hear high heels clicking outside the door. I still tense up when I'm alone, half expecting to feel a rough hand on my shoulder, and sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I think I see 2 gray children standing at the foot of my bed, holding hands and watching me with their sad eyes. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened in that apartment or why I seem to be the focus of so much activity. Was I more sensitive to it somehow, or were they drawn to me specifically? I'll probably never know, but whatever was in that apartment, it was real, and I still feel it with me sometimes, like an echo of something I can't quite forget. Story 10. I moved to Thurso about 3 years ago from Yorkshire. I'd spent most of my life in England, and the idea of living in the Scottish Highlands seemed like a dream come true. I'd seen those gorgeous BBC nature documentaries showing seals lazing on rocks, playful otters, dolphins jumping in crystal waters, and the northern lights dancing across the sky. What they don't show you is the reality of living in Britain's northernmost town. I remember my first proper coastal walk like it was yesterday. It was mid-March, about 2 weeks after I'd moved into my little rental cottage. The weather had been absolute shit up until then, horizontal rain and winds that made me question all my life choices. But that day, the sun actually came out, and I decided to take my dog Maisie for a proper explore along the coastline east of Thurso. The coastal path was stunning at first. Dramatic cliffs, the crash of waves, that wild feeling you get when you're right at the edge of a country. Maisie was having the time of her life, running ahead and sniffing everything. I felt like maybe I'd made the right decision after all. Then we rounded a bend in the path, and I saw them. Dozens of dead seabirds scattered across the bedrock by the sea. Mostly gulls, but some other birds I couldn't identify. They were in various states of decay, some fresh, some just feathers and bones. The smell hit me next, that unmistakable stench of rotting flesh carried on the sea breeze. I called Maisie back immediately, terrified she'd try to eat something. She's a Springer Spaniel with absolutely no sense when it comes to gross things. As I was trying to drag Maisie away, a woman approached from the other direction. She had a daughter about 8 years old and, weirdly, a Springer Spaniel that looked identical to Maisie. The dogs immediately started playing while the woman looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "You're new here," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded and asked about the birds. She sighed. "Bird flu. It's been bad this winter. You shouldn't let your dog near them. It can spread to mammals." Her daughter piped up. "The sea is taking them all. Daddy says it's nature's way." Something about how she said it sent a chill through me. The woman must have noticed because she quickly called her dog and ushered her daughter away, saying they needed to get home before the weather turned. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a slightly odd encounter. I figured the bird flu explanation made sense, even if it was disturbing to see so many dead animals in one place. I decided to head back, the beautiful day suddenly feeling tainted. On my way home, I took a different path that led through a small nature reserve. That's when I saw the official sign, "Warning, avian influenza. Do not touch dead or sick birds. Keep dogs on leads." Great, I thought. Welcome to paradise. That first year in Thurso was an adjustment. The darkness of winter was brutal. In December, the sun rises after 9 and sets before 3. The wind never stops, and the cold seeps into your bones in a way I'd never experienced down south. But I tried to make the best of it, taking Maisie for walks whenever the weather allowed, exploring the coastline bit by bit. It was almost exactly a year after I'd moved when I found the next thing. I was walking on Thurso Beach, the big sandy one right in town. It was low tide, and Maisie was chasing seagulls at the water's edge while I walked along the wet sand. I noticed something dark against the sand about 50 meters ahead. At first, I thought it was driftwood or maybe a clump of seaweed. As I got closer, I realized it was the carcass of some animal. Now, finding dead things on beaches isn't unusual, but this was different. It was a goat or sheep, I couldn't tell which, but it was positioned in the most unsettling way. The upper body was completely skeletal, picked clean by seabirds or fish, but the lower half still had fur and flesh intact. It was sitting upright, almost posed, with its front legs, no, not legs, they looked like arms in that position, stretched out in front of it. The worst part was that from certain angles it looked almost hominid, the way the spine curved and the skull sat on what remained of the neck. It reminded me of those images of Baphomet, that satanic goat figure. I'm not religious or superstitious, but something about it felt wrong, like it had been deliberately positioned that way. I took a photo because I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. When I look at that photo now, it still makes my skin crawl. The image quality is shit because my hands were shaking. 3 days after finding that carcass, I got the call that my mum had died suddenly back in Yorkshire. Heart attack, completely unexpected. She was only 62. I had to rush back down for the funeral and to deal with her affairs. I spent 2 months away from Thurso, and part of me didn't want to come back. But I'd signed a 2-year lease on the cottage, and with all the expenses from the funeral, I couldn't afford to break it. When I returned to Thurso in early summer, something felt different. The town seemed more closed off, or maybe it was just me. I'd always been an outsider, but now I felt it more acutely. People would stop talking when I entered the small local shop. The old men who gathered at the harbor would watch me walk by without the friendly nods I'd gotten used to. 6 months passed. I kept my head down, worked my remote job, walked Maisie, and tried not to think about how isolated I felt. Then came Boxing Day. I decided to hike the Eastern Cliff Trail again, the same one where I'd seen all the dead birds when I first arrived. It was cold but clear, one of those crisp winter days when the air feels like it might shatter if you speak too loudly. The trail eventually led me to an abandoned port settlement, just a handful of stone buildings, most missing their roofs, clustered around a natural harbor. I'd never ventured this far before. According to my map, it was called Skierza. It had the feeling of a ghost town, though I knew it had probably just been abandoned gradually as fishing declined. I spent some time exploring the ruins, fascinated by the remnants of lives once lived there. Old fishing nets rotting against walls, a rusted anchor half buried in weeds, broken crockery scattered by decades of harsh weather. It was getting dark by the time I headed back. Another thing about winter here, darkness falls so quickly it can catch you off guard. I had a headlamp, but the beam seemed feeble against the immense darkness of the coastal path. About halfway back to Thurso, I noticed a flickering light below the cliff path. There's a small beach there, accessible by a steep, rough path down the cliff face. The light was moving, and as my eyes adjusted, I could make out figures, 3 or 4 men standing around what looked like a metal trash can with a fire burning inside it. I switched off my headlamp immediately, not wanting them to spot me. Something about the scene felt wrong. It was freezing, the wind whipping off the North Sea, and these men were standing silently around this fire on a remote beach on Boxing Day night. I crouched down and watched. They were feeding something into the fire. I couldn't see what exactly, but they were taking items from a large bag and carefully placing them in the flames. No one was speaking. The only sound was the crash of waves and the occasional crack from the fire. After about 10 minutes, one of the men looked up toward the cliff path. I ducked down further, heart pounding. When I dared to look again, they were dousing the fire and gathering their things. I didn't wait to see more. I hurried along the path as quietly as possible, constantly looking over my shoulder. I made it home safely, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Who were those men? What were they burning? In a small town like Thurso, you get to know most faces, but I hadn't recognized any of them from my vantage point. The next morning, I decided to go back in daylight to see if there was any evidence of what had happened. I told myself I was being ridiculous, probably just some local lads having a Boxing Day tradition I wasn't aware of. The tide was out when I reached the beach, exposing a wide stretch of sand and rock pools. I found the spot where the men had been, a blackened circle on the sand and some melted patches where hot metal had sunk into the beach. There was nothing else to indicate what they'd been burning. What I did find, about 20 meters away, were 2 dead seal pups washed up on the rocks. This isn't uncommon in itself. Seal mortality can be high, especially in winter, but these were different. Both had identical wounds, a precise bite mark that had removed their skulls entirely. The bodies were otherwise intact, no other predation marks. One seal pup with such a specific injury might be explained by a predator or some freak accident, but 2 with identical wounds found together. That didn't feel natural. I reported it to the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme when I got home. They took my details and said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything back. Over the next few months, I found more dead seals along various parts of the coastline near Thurso, always with the same wound pattern, always in pairs. I've now been in Caithness for 2.5 years, and I've come to a conclusion. This place is cursed. Not in some Hollywood horror movie way with ghosts and demons, but in a more insidious, real-world sense. It's so remote, so cut off from everything. The landscape is beautiful but brutal. The climate is cold, dark, and depressing for most of the year. And there's something about the place that attracts lost souls. People running from something, retirees trying to escape their past, criminals relocated by witness protection. I've heard rumors. The dead things keep washing up on shore. Last week it was a dolphin calf missing its lower jaw in a clean line that no natural predator could create. The week before, another Baphomet sheep posed in that unnatural sitting position on the rocks. I've started documenting everything, taking photos, noting locations and dates. I don't know what I'm going to do with this information, but it feels important to record it. My lease is up in 6 months. I should leave. Any rational person would. But something keeps pulling me to the coastline, day after day. I feel like I'm close to understanding something important, something hidden beneath the surface of this place. Or maybe that's just what Caithness does to you. Makes you think there's meaning in the madness, when really it's just a cold, harsh place at the edge of the world where things wash up and die. Story 11. I still can't explain what happened to me at my parents' new house in Willow Creek last month. I've always considered myself a rational person, but after what I experienced there, I'm not so sure anymore. I've barely slept since then, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. My parents bought this fancy house in Willow Creek about 6 months ago as an investment property. It's one of those modern places with all the bells and whistles, swimming pool with a slide, home theater setup, smart home features, the works. They asked me to house sit for a couple of weeks while they were in Europe celebrating their anniversary. Being between jobs and needing some alone time, I jumped at the chance. The first day was amazing. The house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall pine trees that give it this secluded feel, even though there are neighbors nearby. I spent the afternoon exploring every room, checking out the pool, and figuring out how all the fancy tech worked. The house had this digital door lock system where you punch in a code to get in. Super convenient since I didn't have to worry about keys. That night I ordered pizza, watched some movies in the theater room, and went to bed around midnight in the master bedroom. The bed was ridiculously comfortable, and I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. I remember checking my phone and seeing the time. Something felt off. The house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning, but something had definitely woken me up. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to fall back asleep, when I noticed a strip of light under my bedroom door. I was positive I'd turned off all the lights before going to bed. Thinking maybe I'd forgotten one, I got up to check. When I opened my bedroom door, I discovered nearly every light in the house was on. The hallway, kitchen, living room, all lit up like it was daytime. Even weirder, several interior doors that I'd closed were now wide open. My first thought was that someone had broken in, so I grabbed a golf club from my dad's collection and checked every room, closet, and possible hiding spot. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, and the security system hadn't been triggered. The digital lock on the front door showed no record of being opened since I'd come in earlier that evening. I convinced myself I must have been more tired than I thought and had forgotten to turn off the lights. Maybe I'd sleepwalked? I'd never done that before, but it seemed more plausible than any alternative. I turned everything off, double-checked all the doors and windows, and went back to bed. It took me hours to fall asleep again. The next couple of days were normal. I worked remotely, swam in the pool, and enjoyed the peaceful surroundings. I started to forget about that first night until 4 days into my stay. I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. Something woke me around 2 in the morning, that feeling of being watched. When I opened my eyes, I didn't move a muscle. Standing in the kitchen, about 20 feet away from me, was a man. But not a normal man. This person had an abnormally large head. I mean, it was shaped like a light bulb, narrow at the neck and widening toward the top. He was completely bald, and his skin had this sickly pale glow in the dim light coming from the TV. What terrified me most was his face. He had this permanent wide grin that stretched unnaturally across his face, but his eyes were dead serious. I lay there frozen, pretending to be asleep but watching through barely open eyes. He moved methodically around the kitchen, opening drawers and cabinets, looking inside them, then closing them. He didn't take anything. He just inspected things. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably about 10 minutes. Then he stopped. He turned and looked directly at me. I swear he knew I was awake. He stared at me with that horrific grin for what felt like an eternity, then simply walked out of my field of vision toward the hallway. I heard no doors open or close. After several minutes of lying there paralyzed with fear, I finally found the courage to get up. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and searched the entire house again. Nothing. Nobody. All doors locked, security system armed, no signs of intrusion. I spent the rest of the night sitting up in bed with all the lights on, the knife next to me, and a baseball bat in my hand. I convinced myself it had been a hypnagogic hallucination, those weird waking dreams people sometimes have. I'd read about them before. That had to be it. The next morning I seriously considered leaving, but I felt stupid. It was just a dream, right? Plus I'd promised my parents I'd watch the place. I decided to stay but took some precautions. I moved my stuff into a different bedroom that had fewer windows and a better vantage point of the hallway. I also set up my laptop to record the living room and kitchen while I slept. That night I made sure everything was locked up tight. I even placed some empty water bottles against the doors so they'd make noise if opened. I checked the security system 3 times. Everything was secure. I woke up at 4:15 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I lay there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow of feet in the crack beneath the door. Whatever was out there stood there for nearly 5 minutes without moving. Then the footsteps continued down the hall. I was too terrified to check. I lay there until sunrise, clutching the baseball bat so hard my knuckles were white. When daylight finally came, I got up and found the front door wide open. The security system was still armed, with no record of the door being opened. The water bottles I'd placed were undisturbed. I checked my laptop recording. Nothing unusual appeared on the video, but around 4:10 in the morning, the recording suddenly stopped. When it resumed at 6:30, everything looked normal. This pattern continued for the next few days. I'd secure everything, only to wake up to find doors open, lights on, or objects moved. I started taking photos of how I left rooms before going to bed, and in the morning, things would be slightly different. A chair turned at a different angle, a book moved from one table to another. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes they'd stop at my door, other times they'd pace back and forth in the hallway. I never had the courage to open the door when I heard them. 6 days into this nightmare, I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping more than an hour or 2 each night. I'd called my parents but didn't tell them what was happening. I didn't want to ruin their trip, and honestly, what would I say? I think your house is haunted by a man with a light bulb head. They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. On the 7th night, I barricaded myself in the bedroom. I pushed a dresser against the door and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I was beyond exhausted and finally fell into a deep sleep around midnight. I woke up to someone breathing, not loud breathing, but the soft, rhythmic sound of someone standing very close, watching me sleep. I opened my eyes. He was standing in the doorway, the light bulb-headed man. The dresser and chair had been moved aside without making a sound. He just stood there staring at me with that horrific grin. His head was even larger than I remembered, his body unnaturally thin. This time, I reacted. I jumped up and lunged toward him, screaming. As I reached the doorway, he was gone. Vanished. I ran through the entire house, turning on every light, looking in every possible hiding place. Nothing. All doors and windows locked, security system still armed. I couldn't take it anymore. At 7 in the morning, I threw my things in my car and left. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I just had to get out of there. I stayed at a hotel for the remaining week until my parents returned. I made up some excuse about a water leak making the house temporarily unlivable. They were concerned but understanding. Here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. When my parents returned home, they called to tell me they'd reviewed the security system logs. According to the data, during the 2 weeks I stayed there, the front door had been opened from the inside 37 times between the hours of 2 and 5 in the morning. The system showed no record of the door being opened from the outside during those times. They also found something else, a hidden door in the back of the master bedroom closet. It led to a small maintenance space for pool equipment, but the space had been modified. There was a sleeping bag inside, along with food wrappers and empty water bottles. The dates on some of the food packaging went back months, long before my parents had purchased the house. The police investigated but found no fingerprints other than mine and my parents. They suggested it might have been a squatter who had found a way to bypass the security system, but that doesn't explain the man I saw or how he could appear and disappear so quickly. I've refused to go back to that house. My parents think I'm being ridiculous, but they don't know what I experienced. They're renovating now, sealing up that hidden space and upgrading the security system. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning, feeling like someone's watching me, and sometimes, just for a split second as I open my eyes, I think I can see a shadow with a light bulb-shaped head standing in the corner of my room, grinning. Story 12. I've always been the sensitive one in my family. My grandmother used to say I had the gift, whatever that means. Growing up, I could always sense when something was off in a place, like walking into a room and immediately feeling like I needed to leave. My mum's the same way, and so was her mum before her. We don't talk about it much, just acknowledge it with knowing looks when we feel something others don't. But nothing prepared me for what's been happening in my house the past few weeks. I moved into this place in Elmwood about 2 years ago. It's nothing special. A small 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburb where most of my neighbors are either young families or retirees. The house was built in the 80s, no dramatic history that I know of. The previous owners were moving to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. I got a good deal because the kitchen needed updating, which I finally finished last summer. For 2 years, absolutely nothing unusual happened. Not a single weird feeling, not one unexplained noise. I actually remember thinking how quiet the energy felt here compared to other places I've lived. I even joked with my mom that maybe I was losing the gift. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Trust me, you'll know when something's there." Turns out she was right. It started about 3 weeks ago. I woke up in the middle of the night. No idea what time it was because I hadn't checked my phone. I just remember opening my eyes and immediately feeling wrong. It was like static in my head, this strange pressure that wasn't quite painful, but definitely wasn't normal, and I couldn't move, not even to turn my head. The worst part was the absolute certainty that someone was watching me, not from the doorway or a corner of the room, but from right next to my bed. I could feel eyes on me, studying me, but I couldn't turn to see who or what it was. After what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, I could move again. I sat up gasping, turned on every light in the room, and checked the whole house. Doors locked, windows secured, nobody there. I convinced myself it was sleep paralysis. I'd had it once in college during finals week when I was super stressed, so that explanation made sense. I even Googled it the next morning to reassure myself. For a couple weeks, nothing happened again. I almost forgot about it. Then last Wednesday, I woke up around 1:30 in the morning. This time I wasn't paralyzed. I was lying on my side facing the wall when I felt my mattress sink down behind me, exactly like when someone sits on your bed. I'm talking a significant depression in the mattress, enough that my body actually rolled slightly backward toward it. My heart nearly stopped. I froze for a second, then spun around expecting to see, I don't know what, but there was nothing there. The mattress was flat, no indentation, nothing visible at all. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, kept all the lights on, and watched Netflix until my alarm went off for work. I was a zombie all day, but I still tried to rationalize it. Maybe I dreamed the sensation. Maybe it was some weird muscle spasm that made me feel like I was moving. I'm a project manager at a marketing firm. I deal in facts and deadlines, not ghost stories. But what happened 3 nights ago, I can't explain it away anymore. It was Friday night. I'd stayed up late watching a movie and scrolling through social media. Around 2:30 in the morning, I finally decided to go to bed. I put on my playlist. I always sleep with headphones because I've got noisy neighbors on one side, and was lying on my stomach, that half-asleep state where you're drifting but still somewhat aware. Then I felt it, 3 distinct taps on my upper back, right between my shoulder blades. Not light taps either. They were forceful, deliberate. I could feel the shape of a finger through my t-shirt, pressing hard enough that each tap was uncomfortable. I ripped my headphones off and flipped over so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. There was nobody there, nobody. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights, checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains, ran through the entire house turning on every light, looking in every possible hiding place, checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked from the inside, just as I'd left it before going to bed. I was completely alone in the house. I sat on the couch until sunrise with all the lights on, a kitchen knife beside me. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand, those taps weren't gentle or hesitant. They weren't the kind of touch you'd associate with some harmless Casper-type ghost. They were aggressive, insistent, like someone was trying to get my attention and was irritated I wasn't responding. The next day, I called my mom. I hadn't told her about the earlier incidents, but I told her everything then. She went quiet for a long time. "Has anything gone missing or been moved around?" she finally asked. I said no, nothing like that. Cold spots in the house, electrical problems, strange smells. Again, nothing like that. Just the 3 incidents, all when I was in bed. "Maybe it's trying to communicate with you," she suggested. "Not everything that reaches out is dangerous. But that doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like communication. It feels like, I don't know, like I'm being observed. Tested, like whatever this is, it's figuring out how far it can go." I didn't sleep at all Saturday night, just sat up watching TV with every light on. Sunday night I was so exhausted I crashed at my friend Jessica's place. I told her my heating was broken. I was too embarrassed to tell her the truth. Last night I had to come back home. I couldn't keep imposing on Jessica, and I can't just abandon my house. I set up my laptop to record myself sleeping. I propped it on my dresser, facing the bed, and let it run all night. I watched the footage this morning. For hours, nothing happens, just me tossing and turning. Then, at exactly 2:53 in the morning, something strange happens on the recording. I'm lying still, clearly asleep, when the blanket covering my feet suddenly pulls down about 6 inches. Not like it slipped, like it was deliberately pulled. 10 minutes later, the mattress beside me depresses. You can clearly see it on the video, but there's nothing visible causing it. I nearly threw up watching it. The thing is, I don't remember feeling either of these things happening. I slept through it, which somehow makes it worse, knowing this, whatever it is, was touching my things, getting close to me, while I was completely unaware. I'm sitting at my kitchen table writing this now. I called in sick to work. I can't stop shaking. I've got another recording set up for tonight, but I don't know if I can bring myself to sleep in that bed again. What's most terrifying is how it's escalating. First it was just a presence, then it was sitting on my bed, then it was touching me. Now it's moving my blankets while I sleep. What's next? I've lived here for 2 years with no problems. Why is this happening now? Did I do something to trigger it? Is it something about me? Or would this be happening to anyone living in this house? I'm not religious, but I bought sage today. Going to try smudging the house before sunset. I also called a local paranormal investigation team, but they can't come out until next week. I'm not sure I can last that long. The logical part of my brain keeps trying to find explanations. Maybe there's a gas leak making me hallucinate. Maybe I'm sleepwalking. But that doesn't explain the video. I didn't imagine the blanket moving or the mattress depressing. It's right there on film. My mom wants me to come stay with her, but she lives 3 hours away, and I can't just leave my job. Plus, what if whatever this is follows me there? What if I'm the problem, not the house? I'm going to set up more cameras tonight. One in my bedroom, one in the hallway outside my room, and one in the living room. If anything happens, I want to catch it from multiple angles. Maybe I'll see something I missed before. I keep asking myself what it wants. Why me? Why now? Is it trying to scare me away, or is it trying to get my attention? And if it's the latter, what happens when it finally has it? I just heard something fall in my bedroom. I've been sitting at my kitchen table this entire time and I'm alone in the house. I'm going to go check what it was. Then I'm getting out of here for a while. Maybe a hotel tonight. I'll update if anything else happens. If anyone has experienced something similar or has advice, please let me know. I don't know how much longer I can handle this. Oh, story 13. I've never been good with pain. My friends always joke that I'm the first to cry over a paper cut. So when my stomach started hurting back in October, I tried to ignore it. By Halloween morning, the pain in my right side was unbearable. My boyfriend Jake drove me to the ER, both of us thinking it was just food poisoning or something minor. It wasn't minor. The doctor took one look at my blood work and said my gallbladder was severely infected and I needed emergency surgery. I remember feeling scared but also kind of relieved, at least they knew what was wrong. Then the surgeon came in with a more serious face than before. The infection has progressed to sepsis, he explained. We need to operate immediately. I don't remember much after that, just being wheeled into the operating room, the bright lights overhead, and then waking up hours later feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The surgery went well, they told me, but my recovery would be more complicated because of the sepsis. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days before finally letting me go home on November 3rd. Before discharge, the doctor handed me a prescription for hydrocodone. This is strong stuff, he warned, looking me straight in the eyes. Only take it when the pain is severe. It might cause dizziness, confusion, even hallucinations in some people. I nodded, not really processing everything he was saying. I just wanted to go home. Jake took time off work to help me recover. He set up our bedroom with everything I might need. Water bottle, snacks, my laptop, extra pillows. I felt lucky to have him, especially since the pain was still pretty intense despite the surgery. But I tried to be tough about it. I only wanted to take the hydrocodone when absolutely necessary. The first day home was rough but manageable. I slept most of it away, waking up only when Jake brought me soup or helped me to the bathroom. By the second day, November 4th, I was feeling a bit more alert, but the pain was still stabbing through my abdomen. Around 2 in the afternoon, I finally gave in and took a hydrocodone. I figured I could try to get some work done on my laptop while the medication kicked in. About 30 minutes later, I started feeling weird. Not just pain relief, but a heaviness behind my eyes. The words on my screen seemed to blur together. I remember thinking, okay, maybe working isn't such a good idea right now. I closed my laptop and decided to lie down for a bit. Jake was in the kitchen making lunch. I called out to tell him I was taking a nap, and he said he'd check on me soon. I laid back on our bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and closed my eyes. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that when I opened my eyes again, everything was wrong. Jake was lying next to me, sleeping. That part was normal. What wasn't normal was the darkness that seemed to hang in the corners of our bedroom, thicker than it should have been in the middle of the day. And there was something else, a shape, blacker than black, hovering above me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was just the medication making me see shadows. But then the shape moved and I realized with absolute certainty that it was real. It was a figure, completely black, with no distinguishable features except for its size. It was massive, and it was directly on top of me. I tried to move, to shake Jake awake, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like all my muscles had locked up. The only part of me I could move was my head. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. Then the figure placed its hand, if you could call it that, over my throat. It was enormous, covering nearly my entire neck and part of my chin. The pressure wasn't painful, but it was firm, deliberate. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel my vocal cords straining, my mouth open in what should have been a shriek, but all that escaped was a whimper, so quiet I could barely hear it myself. The room had taken on a strange reddish glow, like someone had replaced all our lights with dim red bulbs. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to see by, enough for me to see that Jake was still sleeping, oblivious to what was happening just inches away from him. I strained against whatever force was holding me down. In my head, I was thrashing wildly, but my body remained perfectly still, like I was encased in concrete. The pressure on my throat remained steady, not choking me but making it clear that it could if it wanted to. Then something caught my eye near the floor. I managed to turn my head slightly, and what I saw made my heart feel like it was going to explode. There was another figure, also black and featureless, crawling across our bedroom floor toward the bed. It moved in a way that wasn't quite human, too fluid, too fast. Its arm was outstretched, reaching toward me, fingers unnaturally long and thin. Tears started streaming down my face. I've been scared before, terrified even, but this was different. This was a primal fear, something so deep and overwhelming that it felt like it was consuming me from the inside out. I was certain in that moment that I was going to die. The crawling figure reached the edge of the bed. I could feel its presence more than see it now, just out of my line of sight. The weight on top of me seemed to increase, pressing me further into the mattress. The hand on my throat tightened just slightly. I closed my eyes, unable to bear looking anymore. I prayed, and I'm not even religious, but I prayed for it to end, for Jake to wake up, for anything to change. And then Jake's voice cut through everything. "Layla, Layla, wake up." His hands were on my shoulders, shaking me. I opened my eyes and gasped, sucking in air like I'd been underwater. The room was normal. No red glow, no black figures, just our bedroom, sunlight streaming through the curtains, and Jake looking down at me with concern written all over his face. "You were having a nightmare," he said, brushing hair from my forehead. "You were making these awful little whimpering sounds." I couldn't speak. I just grabbed him and held on, my whole body shaking. When I finally found my voice, it came out cracked and hoarse. There was something here, two things. One was on top of me, and one was crawling on the floor. Jake looked around the room, then back at me with gentle eyes. "There's nothing here, babe. It must have been sleep paralysis. The doctor did warn us about weird reactions to the medication. Sleep paralysis. I'd heard of it before but never experienced it. It made sense, the inability to move, the feeling of pressure, the hallucinations. But it didn't feel like a hallucination. It felt real. Those things felt real." "What time is it?" I asked, trying to ground myself in reality. "Almost 4, Jake said. "You've been asleep for about an hour." An hour. It had felt like an eternity. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every shadow. Jake stayed close, clearly worried about me. When night came, I refused to sleep. I sat up watching mindless TV until exhaustion finally claimed me around dawn. The next day, I made a decision. I took the bottle of hydrocodone and put it in the back of the medicine cabinet. I was done with it. The surgical pain was still there, still intense, but I switched to over-the-counter painkillers instead. They barely took the edge off, but I preferred physical pain to whatever had happened the day before. Jake thought I was being stubborn. "The doctor prescribed it for a reason," he argued. "One bad experience doesn't mean it'll happen again," but I couldn't shake the feeling that the medication had done more than just give me a hallucination. It felt like it had opened something up, created a doorway that those things had used to reach me. Call it superstition or trauma or whatever you want, but I knew in my gut that if I took that medication again, they would come back. And maybe next time, Jake wouldn't wake me up in time. It's been 3 weeks now. My recovery has been slower and more painful than it needed to be, but I'm getting better. I still sleep with the lights on. I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, certain that I can feel something watching me from the corner of our bedroom. Jake thinks it was just a drug reaction. My mum thinks it was the trauma from the surgery combined with the medication. My best friend thinks I should see a therapist about possible PTSD from the whole sepsis ordeal. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was just sleep paralysis, just a hallucination, just my brain misfiring while under the influence of strong narcotics. The rational part of me wants to believe that, but sometimes when I'm alone in our apartment in Riverside, I swear I can see shadows moving differently than they should. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I feel the faintest pressure on my throat, so light it could be my imagination, but just real enough to make me snap awake, heart pounding. I don't know what happened to me that day. I don't know if those things were real or not, but I know that I've never felt fear like that before, and I never want to feel it again. So the hydrocodone stays in the cabinet, and I keep the lights on, and I try not to think about what might be waiting on the other side of whatever door that medication opened. Story 14. I still get goosebumps talking about this, even though it happened over 6 years ago when I was 13. I grew up in rural Montana, about 20 minutes outside of town, on a property with 2 acres of backyard that bordered an open field. My parents bought the place because they wanted us kids to have space to run around, and we had 5 dogs that needed room too. That evening in late October, my parents were out at dinner for their anniversary. It was just me, my older brother Mark, 16, and my sister Kayla, 17, at home. They were supposed to be watching me, but honestly, Mark was locked in his room playing video games online with his friends, and Kayla was taking a shower and doing whatever beauty routine that always took her forever. So basically, I was on my own. It was around 7:30 in the evening and getting dark fast. The sun had already set, but there was still that faint blue light in the sky. I was in the kitchen finishing my homework when I realized I hadn't seen my dog Chloe in a while. Yeah, I know it's weird that we had the same name. She was a rescue we got when I was little, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever to have a dog with my name. Anyway, I knew the dogs needed to come in for the night. 4 of them were already inside, but Chloe, the dog, was still out. She was a black lab mix, super energetic, and always came when called, like always. That's important to understand what happened next. I went through the kitchen to the garage and opened the door to the backyard. We had this concrete block as a step down from the garage to the yard. I stood there and called out, "Chloe, come here, girl." I waited, but nothing happened. No bark, no sound of her running through the grass, nothing. This was already weird because she always responded. I stepped out onto the concrete block and called again, a bit louder this time, still nothing. Our backyard had these tall pine trees along one side that cast really dark shadows, and there was that big open field beyond our property line. I couldn't see much in the growing darkness. That's when I heard it, someone clapping. You know that specific way people clap when calling a dog? That quick, repeated clapping sound. It was exactly that. It came from around the side of the house, near where the trash cans were kept. My first thought was maybe Mark had come outside looking for me. I called out, "Mark!" No answer. The clapping stopped. I took a few steps toward the side of the house, squinting to see better in the dim light. "Hello?" I called. Nothing was there. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Something felt wrong, really wrong, but I was still worried about my dog. So I turned back toward the yard and called once more, "Chloe!" That's when it happened, and I swear on everything I believe in that this is exactly what I heard. From somewhere in the field beyond our property, a man's voice called back, "Chloe!" It wasn't just that someone called my name, it was how they said it. The voice had this mocking tone, like it was making fun of me. It perfectly mimicked the way I had just called for my dog, but with this underlying tone that seemed amused by my fear. The voice wasn't shouting, but it wasn't quiet either. Just loud enough that I could hear it clearly, like it wanted to make sure I knew it was there. I froze completely. My whole body went cold. In that moment, I knew whatever was out there wasn't human, at least not fully. It felt like my heart stopped beating for a few seconds. Then I heard the familiar sound of paws on grass, and my dog Chloe came bounding up from the complete opposite direction of the voice. She ran right to me, tail wagging like nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. She'd never ignored me calling her before, and she seemed to appear only after that voice called my name. I grabbed her collar and practically dragged her inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock the door behind me. I ran through the garage into the house, slamming and locking that door too. I sat in the living room with all 5 dogs around me, the TV on but not really watching it. I kept the blinds closed. Every few minutes, I'd think I heard something outside and would hold my breath, listening. The dogs seemed restless too, especially Chloe, who kept going to the window like she wanted to look out. When my sister finally came downstairs about 20 minutes later, she found me huddled on the couch with all the dogs piled around me. "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I told her what happened, but she just rolled her eyes. "It was probably just some teenager messing with you, or you imagined it." Mark wasn't any more helpful when he finally emerged from his room. He just shrugged and said, "Weird," before grabbing food from the kitchen. When my parents got home around 10, I was still on the couch, still freaked out. I told my mom everything. Unlike my siblings, she actually listened. She saw how scared I was. I was practically in tears explaining it. She sat next to me and put her arm around my shoulders. "Do you really think someone was out there?" she asked. I nodded. But it wasn't just someone, Mom. It wasn't normal. The way it said my name, it was like it was playing with me. My dad checked all the doors and windows, then went outside with a flashlight to look around. He didn't find anything, but I could tell even he was unsettled. We lived pretty far from any neighbors, and there was no reason for anyone to be wandering around our property at night. That night, I slept in my parents' room, on a makeshift bed on the floor. I couldn't bear to be alone, and every sound made me jump. What bothered me most was thinking about my dog. Why hadn't she come when I first called? Why did she only appear after that voice called my name? It was like whatever was out there had somehow kept her away until it decided to reveal itself. The next morning in daylight, everything seemed normal again, but I refused to go into the backyard alone for weeks. Even now, years later, I won't go out there after dark by myself. My family mostly brushed it off after a few days. My brother suggested it was probably someone from one of the farms down the road playing a prank. My sister thought I'd let my imagination run wild. My dad installed motion sensor lights all around the house, which made me feel a little better, but my mom believed me. One night, about a week after it happened, I overheard her talking to my grandmother on the phone. My grandmother was part Native American, and my mom was asking her about local legends. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught pieces of it, words like skinwalker and shapeshifter. My grandmother apparently told my mom that skinwalkers are evil witches who can take animal form or mimic voices to lure people away. They're known for standing just at the edge of light, watching and waiting. Sometimes they call your name to try to get you to respond or follow them. When I researched it myself later, what freaked me out even more was learning that in many Native American traditions, skinwalkers are drawn to the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, exactly like our backyard that bordered the open field. Some legends say they can control animals, which would explain why my dog didn't come until after that thing called my name. Other stories say they clap their hands to lure dogs or children. Everything matched up with what I experienced. I've had people tell me it was just some random creep, or that I misheard normal night sounds, but they weren't there. They didn't hear how that voice sounded both human and not human at the same time. They didn't feel that bone-deep wrongness that I felt. For months afterward, I had nightmares about being alone in the yard while something called my name from the darkness, trying to get me to follow it into the field. In the dreams, I always feel my feet starting to move on their own, like I'm being pulled toward the voice. We moved away from that house about 2 years later when my dad got a job in another state. I was secretly relieved. Even though nothing like that ever happened again, I never felt completely safe there. Chloe the dog lived another 4 years before passing away from old age. But something strange, she never went into that part of the yard again after that night. If we threw a ball that way, She'd stop at some invisible line and bark until someone went to get it for her. I'm 19 now, and I've told this story to a few friends over the years. Most don't believe me or try to explain it away, but I know what I heard. I know what happened. Something was out there that night, something that knew my name and wanted me to know it was watching. Whatever it was intelligent enough to try to trick me, to mock me, to let me know it was there, but stay just out of sight. That's the part that still gives me nightmares. Not just that it was there, but that it wanted me to know it was there, like it was playing with me, testing how far it could go. And sometimes I wonder if I had called back to it or walked toward the field to investigate. What would have happened to me? I don't have any proof, no recordings, no footprints, nothing but my memory of that voice saying my name in the darkness. But I know what I experienced, and I know that whatever was at the edge of our property that night wasn't human. Some things you just know in your gut, and my gut has never stopped telling me that I came face to face with something supernatural that night, something that folklore calls a skinwalker. Story 15. I've never told this story publicly before. Even after all these years, I still get chills thinking about it. This happened during the summer I turned 15, when my parents sent me to Romania to stay with my friend Adrian's family for 3 weeks. His parents had moved to America when he was little, but they still owned their ancestral home in a tiny village called Lumești, about 2 hours outside of Bucharest. This wasn't some tourist destination. Lumești was just a handful of old stone houses clustered around a single dirt road, surrounded by dense forest and farmland. Adrian told me there were only about 10 permanent residents, mostly elderly people who'd lived there their entire lives. His grandmother had passed away the previous year, but his parents maintained the house for summer visits. The first few days were actually really cool. After living in suburban Chicago my whole life, the Romanian countryside felt like stepping back in time. No internet, spotty cell service, and nothing but woods and fields to explore. Adrian's parents mostly let us do whatever we wanted as long as we helped with chores in the morning and were back before dark. On our 5th day there, we decided to explore the forest behind the house. It had rained that morning, but by afternoon the sun was out and the air was thick with humidity. The forest was old growth, with massive trees that blocked most of the sunlight. Everything smelled like wet earth and rotting leaves. We were just messing around, looking for salamanders under logs and climbing trees, when Adrian froze mid-sentence and grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" he whispered. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement about 30 yards ahead of us, something massive sliding through the underbrush. It was hard to make out through the trees, but I caught glimpses of a pattern that looked like brown and black diamonds. "Is that a snake?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "It's huge," Adrian whispered back. "Way too big to be from around here. Whatever it was, it had to be at least 15 feet long and as thick as my thigh. In Illinois, the biggest snakes you might see are maybe 4 or 5 feet, so this was shocking. I'd only ever seen snakes that big at the zoo. We should have turned back right then. That would have been the smart thing to do. But we were 15, and 15-year-old boys aren't exactly known for making smart decisions. Instead, we decided to follow it. The snake, if that's what it was, moved with surprising speed through the forest. We kept a safe distance, ducking behind trees whenever it seemed to pause. After about 10 minutes, we reached the edge of the forest where it opened up to a small clearing with a weather-beaten chicken coop. The structure looked ancient, with gray wooden walls and a roof that sagged in the middle. "Did it go in there?" I asked, scanning the tall grass. Adrian nodded. "I think so. I don't recognize this place. I didn't know anyone had chickens out this far." We stood at the edge of the trees for a few minutes, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to just go back, but curiosity won out. That snake was unlike anything I'd ever seen in the wild, and I wanted to know what it was doing in a place where it clearly didn't belong. "Let's just peek inside," Adrian suggested. "If the snake's in there, we'll run and tell my dad." The coop was about 50 feet from the tree line. As we approached, I noticed there were no sounds coming from inside. No clucking or movement, just silence. The door was partially open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Adrian reached the door first and peered inside. I saw his body go rigid. "What is it?" I whispered, coming up beside him. Instead of a snake, there was an elderly woman inside the dim coop. She was hunched over, dressed in a faded black dress that reached her ankles. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her skin was deeply wrinkled and sun-spotted. She had her back to us, and she was holding a chicken in her gnarled hands. As we watched in stunned silence, she twisted the chicken's neck with a swift, powerful motion. The crack was so loud it made me flinch. The bird went limp in her hands, and she dropped it into a basket at her feet, which already contained several dead chickens. Adrian cleared his throat nervously. "Hello?" The woman turned slowly. Her face was gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and deeply set eyes that seemed too large for her face. Despite her frail appearance, there was something unnervingly strong about the way she moved. "What are you boys doing here?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, like sandpaper on wood. We saw a snake," Adrian stammered. "A really big one. It came in here." The woman's expression didn't change. She looked around the coop calmly, then back at us. "There's no snake here," she said. The way she pronounced snake sent ice down my spine. She dragged out this sound unnaturally long, almost like she was hissing the word. "Snake." I peered past her into the coop. It was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with wooden nesting boxes along the walls. There was nowhere a 15-foot snake could hide. I saw only chicken feathers scattered across the dirt floor and droplets of fresh blood. "But we saw it come in here," I insisted, though my voice sounded weak even to me. "It was huge, like a python or something." The woman's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, I still see them in my nightmares sometimes. They were black, with no visible distinction between pupil and iris, and they reflected the dim light like polished stones. "There's no snake here, boy," she repeated, emphasizing the sibilance in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Just an old woman tending to her chicken, sis." She took a step toward us, and I noticed how oddly fluid her movement was, almost like she was gliding rather than walking. Her neck seemed longer than it should be, extending from her collar in a way that wasn't quite right. "You boys should run along now," she said, still with that terrible smile. "It's not safe in these woods, sis." Adrian grabbed my sleeve and started backing away. The woman just stood there, watching us with those black eyes, her smile growing wider. As we turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. She was still smiling, but now her mouth was open slightly, and I could see her tongue. It wasn't a normal tongue. It was unnaturally long and forked at the tip, moving slightly as she breathed. We ran. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest near Adrian's house. Both of us were gasping for breath, not just from exertion, but from pure terror. "Did you see her tongue?" I wheezed. Adrian nodded, his face pale. And her eyes, they weren't human. "Do you know who she is?" I asked. "I've never seen her before," Adrian replied, still trying to catch his breath. "And I know everyone in this village. There are only like 10 people who live here permanently." We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Had the snake somehow transformed into the woman, or had the woman been there all along and we just imagined the snake? Neither explanation made any sense. Adrian wanted to tell his parents, but I convinced him not to. I was afraid they wouldn't believe us, or worse, they'd think we were making it up for attention. That night, we locked the bedroom door and pushed a dresser in front of it. Every creak of the old house made us jump. We hardly slept, taking turns keeping watch, convinced that at any moment we'd hear a hissing at the window or see a scaled hand reaching through the gap in the curtains. The next morning, against my better judgment, we decided to go back to the chicken coop. In daylight, with the fear of the previous day somewhat diminished, we convinced ourselves that there had to be a logical explanation. But when we reached the clearing, the coop was gone. Not destroyed or collapsed, completely gone, as if it had never existed. The grass showed no signs of a structure ever having stood there. We spent nearly an hour searching the area, thinking we must have gotten turned around, but there was no coop anywhere. Adrian's dad noticed our agitation when we returned. When he pressed us, we finally told him about the snake and the old woman. I expected him to laugh or tell us we were making it up, but instead, his face went ashen. He made us promise not to go back into that part of the forest. He didn't explain why, just insisted that we stay close to the house for the remainder of our visit. That night, I heard him and Adrian's mom arguing in Romanian. I couldn't understand the words, but his voice was urgent, and she sounded frightened. The next day, Adrian's mom announced that we needed to cut our trip short. Some family emergency had come up back in America, she claimed, though Adrian and I both knew that was a lie. We packed up and left Lumesh that afternoon. On the drive to Bucharest, I asked Adrian what his dad had said about the woman. He was reluctant to tell me at first, but eventually admitted that according to local folklore, there was something that lived in those woods, something ancient that could take different forms. He called it Șarpele Bătrân, the old serpent, Adrian whispered, glancing at his parents in the front seat to make sure they couldn't hear. They say it's been there since before the village existed. Sometimes it appears as a snake, sometimes as an old woman. But that's just a story, right? I asked, not really believing my own words. Adrian shrugged, but his eyes were serious. My grandmother used to tell me never to go into the western forest alone. She said if you ever see an old woman you don't recognize, especially one who speaks with a hiss, you should run and never look back. It's been 11 years since that summer in Romania. I've tried to convince myself that we just had an overactive imagination, that we saw a regular snake and then a strange but ordinary old woman, and our teenage minds connected them into something supernatural. But I know what I saw. I remember those inhuman black eyes, that forked tongue, and the way she moved, not like a person at all, but like something else wearing human skin. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear a soft hissing outside my window. I've researched snake cults and shape-shifting myths from that region of Romania. There are old stories about beings that could change form, entities that existed before Christianity reached those remote villages. Some of the accounts describe exactly what we saw, a creature that appears sometimes as a massive serpent, sometimes as an elderly woman with snake-like features. Adrian and I don't talk about it anymore. When I brought it up a few years ago, he changed the subject immediately. His family never returned to Lumești, and they sold the house the following year. I still don't know what we encountered in those woods. Was it a woman who could transform into a serpent, or something inhuman that merely disguised itself as an old woman? All I know is that whatever it wasn't natural, and it recognized us for what we were, intruders in its territory. Sometimes I think about going back just to prove to myself that it was all in my head, but then I remember those black eyes and that horrible hissing voice, and I know I never will. Story 16. I still can't believe I'm writing this down. I've been reading everyone's experiences here for months, but never thought I'd be posting my own. What happened yesterday finally pushed me to share. I need to get this out somewhere people won't think I'm totally crazy. I'm 16, and my family moved into our house in Cedar Falls when I was just 4. It's not some creepy old Victorian or anything, just a normal suburban house built in the early 2000s. Nothing special, nothing that should be haunted, but it is, and yesterday was the worst it's ever been. I woke up around 6:30 a.m. to get ready for school. Mom was already in the kitchen making coffee, and everything seemed completely normal. I remember thinking it was going to be a good day because I'd actually slept through the night for once. That almost never happens anymore. See, for the past few months I've been having these disruptions. That's the best word I can think of. I'll be sleeping and then suddenly I'm wide awake, heart pounding, with this overwhelming feeling that something is in my room with me. Sometimes I see shadows moving across my walls or standing in the corners. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched. Anyway, after breakfast, I grabbed my backpack and headed to school. The whole day was totally ordinary. I bombed a math quiz, ate lunch with my friends, normal teenager stuff, but the entire time I had this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something was off. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a text from Mom or Dad saying something was wrong at home. When I got home around 3, the house was empty. Mom had left a note saying she'd gone grocery shopping and would be back by 4. Dad was still at work. My little sister Emma was at dance practice. So I had the house to myself, which would normally be awesome, but that day it just felt wrong. I tried to focus on my homework, but I kept getting distracted by little noises, creaks and thumps that houses make all the time, but they seemed louder than usual. At one point I swear I heard footsteps upstairs, but when I went to check, there was nothing. By the time Mom got home with the groceries, I was jumpy and on edge. She noticed something was up, but I just told her I was stressed about school. I didn't want to freak her out. She's been dealing with her own weird experiences lately. After dinner, I tried to act normal. We all did. That's how we've been handling things for months now, pretending everything's fine, not talking about the strange things we've all seen. Dad watched TV, Mom folded laundry, Emma played on her tablet, and I scrolled through TikTok. Just a normal family evening. I went to bed around 10. I remember checking the time because I was trying to get more sleep lately. I was exhausted from all the nights of waking up terrified. I double-checked that my door was locked, a habit I've developed. Turned on my small bedside lamp. I can't sleep in complete darkness anymore, and got into bed. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly because the next thing I remember is waking up suddenly. My room felt ice cold. My digital clock read 3:17 a.m., that time again. For some reason, I always seem to wake up around 3 in the morning when weird stuff happens. At first, I thought I was having another one of those dreams, the ones where I dream I'm awake in my bedroom, but something's off. I've had them so many times now. There's always a dark figure by my window just standing there watching me. And each time I have the dream, it gets closer to my bed. But this wasn't a dream. I was definitely awake. My lamp was still on, casting a dim glow across my room. And there, by my window, was a shadow. It wasn't just a random shadow from my curtains or furniture. It had a shape, a human shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just lay there, watching it, and it watched me back. I know that sounds crazy because shadows don't have eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. Then it moved, not toward me like in my dreams, but toward my door. It sort of glided across my room. No footsteps, no sound at all. When it reached my door, it just went through it, like the door wasn't even there. As soon as it was gone, I could move again. I sat up in bed, heart racing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, but I hadn't. I know I hadn't. I was too scared to leave my room, but too scared to stay there too. So I just sat in my bed, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at my door, waiting for something to happen. About 20 minutes later, though it felt like hours, I heard Emma scream. I bolted out of bed and ran to her room without thinking. Mom and Dad were already there. Emma was sitting up in bed, crying hysterically, pointing at her closet. It was there, she kept saying. It was watching me. Mom tried to calm her down while Dad checked the closet. Of course, there was nothing there, just clothes and toys. It was probably just a bad dream, sweetie, Mom said, but her voice was shaky. She didn't believe it any more than Emma did, or me. We all ended up in my parents' bedroom. Emma wouldn't go back to her room, and honestly, I didn't want to either. Dad made a joke about a family sleepover to try to lighten the mood, but no one laughed. I don't think any of us slept after that. We just lay there in the dark, listening to the house. Around 5, Dad finally got up and said he was going to make coffee since we were all awake anyway. That's when it all went crazy. As soon as Dad left the room, we heard him yell. Not a scared yell, more like surprised. Then a loud thud, like something heavy had fallen. Mom jumped out of bed and ran to the hallway. Emma and I followed. Dad was standing at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness of our living room. "There's someone down there," he whispered. Mom grabbed her phone to call 911, but before she could dial, every light in the house turned on at once. Every single one. Lamps, ceiling lights, even the little nightlight in the bathroom. And then, just as suddenly, they all went out. Complete darkness. Emma started crying again. I held her hand so tight I was probably hurting her, but she was squeezing mine just as hard. "Everyone stay here," Dad said, and started down the stairs. "John, don't," Mom begged, but he went anyway. We heard him moving around downstairs, then silence. After what felt like forever, he called up, "There's no one here, but you all need to see this." We went downstairs slowly, huddled together. Dad was standing in the living room, pointing at the wall. All our family photos, every single one, had been taken down and arranged on the floor, not thrown or broken, but carefully placed in a perfect circle. In the center was Emma's teddy bear, the one she'd outgrown years ago and we'd packed away in the attic. "I didn't do this," Dad said, his voice barely audible. "I came down and they were just like this." We all just stood there, staring. I don't know how long. Then Emma pointed at one of the photos and started crying again. It was a family portrait we'd taken last Christmas, except now there was a fifth figure standing behind us, a dark, blurry shape, like someone had smudged the photo with their thumb, but it was clearly human-shaped, and it hadn't been there before. Mom grabbed the photo, hands shaking. "This isn't possible," she kept saying. "This isn't possible." Dad checked the other photos. 3 more had the same dark figure, always standing near one of us, always watching. That's when I told them about what I'd seen in my room earlier. And once I started talking, it all came pouring out. All the nights I'd woken up terrified, all the shadows I'd seen, all the times I'd felt watched. And then Mom and Dad started talking too, about the gray figure they'd seen crouched on their dresser a few months ago, watching them for half an hour before disappearing. About the larger, darker figure they'd seen walking across their bedroom, about all the things they'd been keeping from Emma and me, trying to protect us. And Emma told us about the tan-colored figure she'd seen crouching by my bed that night in middle school when we shared a room. I remembered that night. I'd woken up and seen it too, and when I asked Emma if she saw it, she started crying. We'd never talked about it again after that. We've been seeing these things for years, all of us, and we've all been too scared to talk about it. We ended up staying awake until sunrise, sitting in the living room with all the lights on, telling each other everything. The tapping on my back and head that woke me up last week. The breathing I sometimes feel on my face when I'm trying to sleep. The dark figure from my dreams that gets closer every time. When the sun finally came up, Dad put all the photos back on the walls. We tried to act normal again, like we do every time something happens. I even tried to go to school, but Mom called me in sick. None of us wanted to be alone in the house. I tried sage cleansing again yesterday afternoon. I've done it before, but it never works. Whatever's in our house doesn't care about sage or prayers or any of that stuff. It just watches us. Last night I slept in Emma's room, or tried to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that dark figure from my room, moving toward my door, moving toward Emma's room. I don't know what to do anymore. We can't move. Dad's job keeps us here, and the housing market sucks right now anyway. We can't afford to just leave, so we're stuck here with whatever these things are. They don't seem to want to hurt us. They've had plenty of chances if that was their goal. They just watch, and honestly, that's almost worse, like we're some kind of entertainment for them. It's morning now. Emma's still asleep beside me. Mom and Dad are downstairs making breakfast, acting like everything's normal again. But nothing's normal, and I don't think it ever will be again. I keep wondering what's going to happen tonight. Will I see that figure again? Will it get closer this time? Will it finally reach me? I don't know what these things want from us. I don't know why they chose our house, our family. All I know is they're here. They've always been here, and they're watching us right now. Story 17. I honestly don't know how to explain what happened at my best friend Emily's house. It's been almost 7 years since she moved out, and 3 since the place burned down, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've been sitting on this experience for years, too afraid to even type it out, but after our conversation last week, I feel like I need to share this somewhere, with people who might understand. Emily and her husband bought the house on Sycamore Drive in Oakwood Heights back in 2013. It was a gorgeous two-story colonial with dark green shutters, a wraparound porch, and these beautiful bay windows in the living room. From the outside, it looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place where you'd imagine raising a happy family. But from the moment I first stepped inside, something felt wrong. I remember the first time I visited after they moved in. Emily was so excited to show me around, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, this wave of uneasiness washed over me. The air felt heavy, like walking through water. It was summer, but inside it was freezing. I blamed it on the air conditioning, but even Emily commented on how they couldn't seem to get the temperature right no matter how they adjusted the thermostat. Does it feel, I don't know, off to you? I asked her that first day. She hesitated before admitting, yeah, kind of. Mark thinks I'm being dramatic, but I can't shake this feeling like we're being watched. I wish I'd told her to run then, to sell the place and never look back. But who walks away from a dream home because of a feeling? The first few months, the oddities were subtle. Emily would call me, saying she'd heard Mark calling her name from upstairs, but when she went to check, he was still at work. Mark experienced the same thing, hearing Emily's voice when she wasn't home. When I started babysitting their daughter Lucy, I heard it too. My name, Maggie, clear as day in Emily's voice, coming from the kitchen when I knew she was out with Mark. Lucy was born about a year after they moved in. She was the sweetest baby, but she never slept well in that house. When she was about 6 months old, Emily called me at 2 a.m, completely frazzled. Lucy wakes up screaming every night at exactly 3:30, she told me, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Not crying, Maggie, screaming like she's terrified of something. Emily and Mark set up a baby monitor with a camera. I was there the morning after they reviewed the footage for the first time. Emily's hands were shaking as she played the video for me. The timestamp read 3:29 a.m. Lucy was sleeping peacefully in her crib, the nightlight casting a soft glow across her room. Then, at exactly 3:30, we saw them, shadowy legs walking past her doorway. Just legs from the knee down, no body attached. Seconds later, Lucy bolted upright, her face contorted in terror as she began screaming. I still get chills remembering that footage. Mark checked the entire house, thinking it might be an intruder, but they never found anyone. The security system hadn't been triggered. All doors and windows were locked from the inside. But of all the strange things in that house, nothing disturbed me more than the pantry under the stairs. It was just a small storage space, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, with built-in shelves where Emily kept canned goods and dry ingredients. The doors were white with 4 square panels and this old-fashioned silver hook-and-eye latch. Nothing about it should have been unsettling, but every time I had to go in there to grab something, my skin would crawl. The temperature inside the pantry was always at least 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house, which was already unnaturally cold, and there was this pressure, like the air was being squeezed out of my lungs. I could never stay in there for more than a few seconds before feeling an overwhelming urge to get out. Once, when I was babysitting Lucy, I needed to grab pasta from the pantry for dinner. I unhooked the latch, pulled open those white doors, and stepped inside. The cold hit me immediately, but this time it was accompanied by a whisper. It was so faint I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from the back wall. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. That's when I realized something that had been bothering me subconsciously for months. The pantry was too small. The space under the stairs should have extended at least 3 more feet, but the back wall of the pantry cut it short. Where was that extra space going? I mentioned it to Emily the next day. I've thought the same thing, she admitted. Mark even got out the blueprints from when we bought the place. According to them, the pantry should be deeper, but when he measured, the dimensions matched what's actually there. He thinks the blueprints are wrong. But we both knew something wasn't right. The incidents escalated over the next 2 years. Objects would disappear and reappear in different places. The sound of footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs. Lucy, as she grew into a toddler, refused to go near the pantry and would cry if anyone tried to make her. She developed an imaginary friend named the Grey Lady, who, according to Lucy, lived in the wall and was sad because she couldn't find her baby. Emily and Mark's marriage started falling apart. They fought constantly, both on edge from lack of sleep and the persistent feeling of wrongness that permeated their home. Mark started staying late at work. Emily lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and jumped at the smallest sounds. I begged them to move out, but they'd sunk all their savings into the house and couldn't afford to sell at a loss. Finally, after Mark lost his job, showing up exhausted and irritable hadn't helped his performance, they had no choice but to foreclose and move in with Emily's parents. The relief was immediate. Lucy started sleeping through the night. The tension between Emily and Mark eased. It was like they'd all been holding their breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. The house sat empty for a while, then was bought and flipped by a developer who sold it to a young couple. 2 years later, it burned down. Electrical fire, they said. No one was hurt. Emily and I didn't talk about the house much after they moved out. It was like we both wanted to pretend those 3 years never happened. Until last week, we were having wine at my place, looking through old photos on her phone, when we came across pictures from Lucy's second birthday party at the Sycamore house. There was one of Lucy opening presents in the kitchen, and in the background you could see the area under the stairs. God, I hated that pantry, I said with a shudder. Emily nodded. Those creepy white doors with the squares. Remember how cold it was in there? And that silver latch that would sometimes be hooked when no one had hooked it, I added. We scrolled through more kitchen photos, reminiscing about the weird experiences, when suddenly I noticed something. Wait, go back to that one. Emily swiped back to a clear shot of the kitchen, including the area under the stairs. There were no white doors, no latch, just a solid wall with wood paneling that matched the rest of the kitchen. That's not right, Emily whispered. Where's the pantry? We frantically searched through every photo from their time in the house. Kitchen pictures, birthday parties, holiday gatherings. In every single image, there was no pantry under the stairs, just that same solid wall. This is impossible, I said, my hands shaking. We both remember it. We used it almost daily for 3 years. Emily was pale. Mark used it too. He built those shelves himself. We called Mark, who confirmed he distinctly remembered the pantry. White doors with 4 squares, silver latch, shelves he'd installed. 3 different people with the exact same detailed memory of a space that, according to photographic evidence, never existed. I've spent the past week trying to make sense of this. Did the house somehow create an illusion so powerful that 3 adults shared the same hallucination for years? Or did that pantry exist in some kind of alternate dimension, accessible only at certain times or to certain people? Was it connected to whatever entity was terrorizing Lucy at night? The rational part of my brain says there must be a logical explanation. Maybe all the photos somehow missed the pantry. Maybe someone edited them after the fact, though why would anyone do that? But deep down, I know what we experienced was real. That house on Sycamore Drive wasn't just haunted. It was something worse, something that could bend reality itself, creating spaces that shouldn't exist and erasing them as if they never were. I still have nightmares about opening those white square doors, stepping into that cold, cramped space, and finding myself unable to get out as the walls close in around me. And sometimes in the quietest moments before dawn, I swear I can hear someone whispering my name in Emily's voice, calling me back to a place that, according to every photograph, was never really there at all. Story 18. Since we moved into my wife's grandmother's house, I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what we've experienced over the past few months has seriously messed with my head. It all started back in April, when my wife's grandmother passed away. She was a sweet woman, always baking cookies for our kids and telling stories about the good old days. Her death wasn't unexpected. She'd been declining for months, but it still hit the family hard, especially my wife. They were really close. After the funeral, my father-in-law surprised us by offering us her house. He said he couldn't bear to live there himself. Too many memories, but he didn't want to sell it to strangers either. With the housing market being what it is, and us cramped in our two-bedroom apartment with two growing kids, it seemed like the perfect solution. I should have known something was off when my father-in-law stayed there temporarily to clean things out and started acting weird. He called my wife one morning, sounding confused. He'd left a lamp on in the living room before going to bed. He was always paranoid about navigating unfamiliar places in the dark, but woke up to find it switched off. What really freaked him out was that the overhead light in Grandma's bedroom, the room where she died, was on. He swore up and down that he hadn't gone in there since arriving. "It's probably just old wiring," I told my wife after she relayed the story. "Houses this age have quirky electrical systems." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. We moved in about 3 weeks after Grandma's passing. The first few days were uneventful, just the normal chaos of unpacking boxes and arguing about furniture placement. I was starting to think my father-in-law had just been stressed and imagined things. Then it happened. I was in the shower one morning before work when my wife decided to organize our closet. Our bedroom door was firmly shut because the AC was running, and we were trying to keep the cool air contained. When I got out of the shower, I found her standing in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the open door. "Did you come out here while I was in the closet?" she asked, her voice tight. "No, I was in the shower the whole time." "Why?" "The door was closed. I closed it myself. Now it's open." I shrugged it off. "Maybe you didn't latch it properly. The air pressure from the AC can push doors open if they're not fully closed." She shook her head. "I made sure it was closed. I even heard it click." I didn't know what to say, so I just changed the subject. But that night I found myself lying awake, listening to every creak and groan of the house. A few days later, I was alone in the basement sorting through some boxes. The kids were at school, and my wife was grocery shopping. I had music playing on my phone, but not too loud. I like to be aware of my surroundings when I'm home alone. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a cardboard box sliding across the concrete floor behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but nothing was there. The basement was empty except for the stacked boxes and old furniture we'd inherited with the house. I told myself it was just the house settling or maybe something from outside, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crawled up my spine. That same week, I was in the kids' room helping my daughter organize her toys when a bag of stuffed animals fell off the top shelf of the closet. It wasn't teetering on the edge or anything. It was pushed all the way back against the wall. There was no reason for it to just suddenly drop like that. My daughter didn't seem fazed. "That happens all the time," she said casually, continuing to sort her toys. "What do you mean, all the time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged. "Since we moved here, things fall, doors open. Grandma's just checking on us." I felt a chill run through me. We hadn't told the kids about the strange occurrences. We didn't want to scare them. "Why do you think it's great-grandma?" "Because who else would it be?" she replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "She lived here forever. Mom says people leave pieces of themselves in places they love." I changed the subject quickly, but her words stuck with me. The most convincing incident happened about a month after we moved in. My wife and I were both in the basement doing laundry on a Saturday afternoon. The kids were at a neighbor's house for a play date. We were talking about mundane things, bills, school schedules, whose turn it was to mow the lawn, when we heard a loud bang that made us both jump. I turned to see that some metal wire shelving units we had leaning against the far wall had somehow fallen flat against the concrete. These weren't lightweight shelves. They were heavy-duty storage racks that would take considerable force to move. I was sitting in a chair a good 10 feet away, and my wife was across the room folding clothes. "What the hell?" I muttered, getting up to investigate. The shelves were now lying flat on the ground, as if someone had pushed them over, but there was nobody else in the basement with us. As I was examining the shelves, trying to figure out how they could have fallen, we both heard a distinct sound from the opposite corner of the basement, the unmistakable noise of a cardboard box sliding across concrete. My wife's face went pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We both stood frozen, listening intently, but the basement was silent again except for the hum of the dryer. That was the moment I couldn't deny it anymore. Something strange was happening in this house, something I couldn't explain with drafts or old wiring or house settling. In that moment of clarity, or maybe insanity, I did something I never thought I'd do. I spoke out loud to an empty room. Would you please quit moving stuff? My voice echoed slightly in the basement. My wife looked at me with wide eyes but didn't say anything. The strange thing is, after I said that, we didn't hear any more noises that day. It was almost as if, whatever it was, had listened to me. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, my wife and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. Do you think it's her? My wife asked quietly as we sat on the couch, the TV on mute. My grandmother? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know. I've never believed in ghosts, but I can't explain what's happening here. She loved this house, my wife continued. She lived here for over 50 years. Maybe she's not ready to leave. But why move things? Why open doors? It doesn't make sense. My wife was quiet for a moment. Maybe it's her way of letting us know she's still here, that she's watching over us. I didn't sleep well that night, or many nights after. The occurrences continued, though they seemed less frequent. Doors would open on their own. Objects would move or fall without explanation. Once I found all the kitchen cabinet doors standing open when I came down for breakfast, though everyone swore they hadn't done it. My father-in-law refuses to stay overnight when he visits. He says the house gives him the creeps now, though he won't elaborate further. I've caught him looking anxiously at corners of rooms as if expecting to see something or someone there. The weirdest part is that I've almost gotten used to it. When I hear unexplained noises or find things moved, I just sigh and go about my day. What else can I do? We can't afford to move, and honestly, whatever is happening doesn't seem malicious, just persistent. Last week, I was home alone doing some work in the home office we set up in what used to be Grandma's sewing room. I was deep in concentration when I felt a sudden cold spot pass over me, like someone had opened a freezer right next to my chair. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I had the distinct feeling that someone was standing behind me. I slowly turned around, half expecting to see an apparition of an elderly woman, but of course, there was nothing there. Just as I was about to turn back to my computer, I noticed something odd about the bookshelf against the wall. A photo album that had been pushed back on the shelf was now sitting at the edge, as if someone had pulled it forward. With shaking hands, I got up and took the album down. It was one of Grandma's old photo books, filled with faded pictures from the 70s and 80s. As I flipped through it, a loose photo slipped out and fell to the floor. It was a picture of my wife as a little girl, sitting on her grandmother's lap on the very porch of this house. They were both laughing, their faces lit with joy. I don't know why, but in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe my father-in-law was right to give us this house. Maybe Grandma is still here, in her way, watching over her granddaughter and her family. I put the photo back in the album and returned it to the shelf, making sure to push it all the way back. "Thank you," I said softly to the empty room. "But please, if you're going to keep moving things, could you at least help with the cleaning too?" The light fixture above me flickered once, and I swear I heard what sounded like a soft chuckle. I still don't know what to believe. All I know is that this house holds more than just our family, and whatever or whoever shares this space with us, I've come to accept that they were here first, and they're not going anywhere. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and I'm the last one awake, I'll hear the faint sound of footsteps upstairs, moving from room to room, checking on the sleeping children, and despite everything, it makes me feel strangely safe, knowing we're not alone. Story 19. Have you never told anyone about this before? Not my therapist, not my wife, not even my brother, who was there for part of it. I'm still not sure if writing it down will help or just make it worse, but I can't keep carrying this alone. I grew up in Millbrook, one of those towns so small it barely exists on maps. Our house was nothing special, a modest three-bedroom ranch with faded blue siding that my dad was always promising to replace next summer. My room was at the end of the hallway, with a window facing the backyard and our old oak tree. The first time I saw her, I was 7. It was early on a Saturday morning in October, that perfect fall weather when the air starts getting crisp. I remember because I'd been excited about going to the Harvest Festival in town later that day. My mom had promised caramel apples and hay rides. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual for me. The sun was just starting to rise, casting this weird gray-blue light through my curtains. At first, I thought it was just that foggy space between dreaming and waking up, where everything feels a little off. But then I realized someone was in my room. She was standing right beside my bed, maybe 2 feet away, just watching me. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, with skin so pale it looked almost blue in that early morning light. Her hair was jet black, hanging straight down past her shoulders. She wore this old-fashioned black dress with these weird red details around the collar and cuffs. Not like anything a normal kid would wear. The red wasn't bright like a crayon. It was dark, almost brownish. What freaked me out most were her eyes. They weren't scary or glowing or anything like that. They were just sad, deeply, overwhelmingly sad, like she'd seen terrible things no kid should ever have to see. I remember sitting up in bed, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. It was like my voice got stuck somewhere between my chest and my mouth. I blinked, and she was gone. Just gone. Not like she walked away or faded. She was there, and then she wasn't. I told my mom about it at breakfast, but she just smiled and said I had an active imagination. Probably just shadows from the tree outside your window, she said, pouring more cereal into my bowl. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. I almost convinced myself she was right. Almost. The second time happened about 6 months later in April. I'd been having trouble sleeping. My parents had been fighting a lot that week. Not the normal bickering, but the kind of fights where voices get low and dangerous and doors slam and nobody talks at breakfast the next morning. It was way past midnight. I know because I'd been watching the red numbers on my alarm clock tick by for what felt like forever. .1237, .1238, .1239. The house was quiet by then, but I still couldn't sleep. My bedroom door was cracked open, letting in a thin line of soft light from the nightlight in the hallway. I rolled over to face the wall, trying to get comfortable when I felt it. That weird, prickly feeling on the back of your neck when someone's watching you. I flipped back over, and there she was, standing at the foot of my bed, the pale girl in the black dress. This time I could see her more clearly. Her dress wasn't just black. It had these intricate red patterns stitched into the fabric, almost like tiny flowers, or maybe symbols. I couldn't tell. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she was just standing there, blocking some of the light from the hallway. Weirdly, I wasn't scared this time. I mean, I was a little, but not in that heart-pounding, need-to-scream way from before. It was more like acceptance, like seeing a distant relative you don't know well but recognize. I remember staring at her for what felt like forever, waiting for her to do something. Speak, move, disappear. She did none of those things. She just stood there, watching me with those sad eyes. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning and she was gone. I didn't tell my parents this time. My mom had dark circles under her eyes and Dad had started sleeping on the couch. Nobody had time for ghost stories. Life went on. My parents' fighting got worse, then better, then worse again. My brother broke his arm falling out of the oak tree. I got the flu and missed 2 weeks of school. Normal kid stuff. Sometimes I'd think about the pale girl, but it was starting to feel like maybe I had dreamed her up after all. Then came the third encounter, almost a year after the second one. I was 8, almost 9 by then. It was another sleepless night. My grandpa had been in the hospital for a few days, something with his heart, and everyone was on edge. Dad had driven 3 hours to be with him, and Mom was snappy and distracted. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck up there years ago. From my bed, I could see through my partially open door into part of the living room. The TV was still on, playing some late-night show with the volume turned low. Mom must have fallen asleep on the couch again. That's when I saw her for the third time. The pale girl was standing in the doorway between our kitchen and living room, visible through the gap of my bedroom door. She wasn't looking at me this time. Her head was slightly bowed and she looked different, still sad, but now there was something else in her expression. Resignation maybe, or pity, and she wasn't alone. She was holding hands with something. I don't know how else to describe it. A tall, inky black figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't exactly human-shaped, more like a shadow that had pulled itself off the wall and decided to stand on its own. The only distinct feature I could make out was what looked like a cowboy hat on top of its featureless head. I wanted to call out to my mom, but my voice wasn't working again. I just lay there, frozen, watching this impossible pair standing in our living room. The girl turned then, looking directly at me through the crack in my door. A single tear rolled down her pale cheek. I remember pulling my blanket up to my chin, tears starting to roll down my own face, though I didn't understand why I was crying. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, morning light was streaming through my window. I woke to the sound of the phone ringing, Mom's voice, answering it, then a strange, hollow silence, followed by a single sob. I got out of bed and crept down the hallway. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, the phone still in her hand, staring at nothing. "Mom," I whispered. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Go wake your brother," she said, her voice sounding wrong, flat and distant. "Aunt Linda will be here soon." Aunt Linda lived 2 towns over and only came for emergencies or holidays. This wasn't a holiday. My brother was already awake when I went into his room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed, staring at his hands. "Did something happen to Dad?" he asked before I could say anything. I froze. "I don't know," I said, but somehow I did know, and somehow so did he. Aunt Linda arrived within the hour. She sat us down in the living room, right where the pale girl and the shadow figure had been standing the night before, and told us that Dad had had a heart attack while visiting Grandpa at the hospital. The doctors couldn't save him. I remember looking at the exact spot where the girl had stood and suddenly understanding who or what she was. She wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. She was a warning, a harbinger. Every time she appeared, something bad followed. After Dad's funeral, I started keeping track. The girl would appear, and within days, something would happen. Sometimes big things, like when our neighbor's house caught fire, or when my best friend's mom got diagnosed with cancer. Sometimes smaller things, a nasty fight at school, our car breaking down on a deserted road during a thunderstorm, my brother's bicycle accident that left him with a concussion. She appeared before my mom started dating again, a relationship that ended with a restraining order. She was there the night before my grandma called to tell us Grandpa had passed too. She stood in my college dorm room the night before I got the call that Mom had been in a car accident. She's always alone now. I never saw the shadow figure with the cowboy hat again after the night my dad died. I've done research, spent countless hours in libraries and online forums trying to find something, anything that might explain what she is or why she chose me. I've found stories of banshees and other harbingers of death, but nothing that quite matches my pale girl in the black dress with red details. I'm 32 now. I've built a life despite her appearances, college, marriage, a decent job. My wife thinks I have anxiety issues because sometimes I get these bad feelings and become overly cautious or worried. How do I tell her that I've learned to recognize the signs of the pale girl's visits even when I don't see her directly? The sudden cold spots in rooms, the way electronics malfunction for no reason. the strange metallic taste in my mouth. 3 nights ago, I woke up at 3 in the morning. My wife was sleeping peacefully beside me, but something had pulled me from sleep. I rolled over, and there she was, the pale girl, standing in the corner of our bedroom. She hasn't aged a day in all these years. Still the same sad eyes, still the same black dress with its strange red details that I now realize look like tiny handprints. She didn't say anything. She never does. But she raised her hand slowly and pointed directly at my wife's sleeping form. I haven't slept since. I've made my wife promise not to drive anywhere. I've checked the smoke detectors, the locks on all the doors and windows, the brakes on her car. I've called her parents to make sure they're okay. I've done everything I can think of to ward off whatever's coming, but it's coming. It always does. The girl in the black dress has never been wrong. I still don't know what she is or why she chose me. All I know is that when she appears, I need to brace myself for what follows. And right now, all I can do is wait, watching my wife sleep, praying that whatever's coming isn't as bad as the dread building inside me. She's out there somewhere, watching, waiting, warning me in her silent, terrible way. And I'm still not sure if she's trying to help me or simply making sure I suffer with the knowledge of what's to come. Story 20. I never believed in the paranormal until last Friday. I'm still trying to process what happened to me in my grandma's basement in Allentown. I've read hundreds of accounts of weird experiences online, but I never thought I'd be posting one myself. My girlfriend Lily and I were staying at my grandmother's house while she was visiting my aunt in Pittsburgh. We'd been there since Wednesday, and everything had been completely normal until Friday night. The house is this old 2-story place built in the 1960s. Nothing special, but my grandma has kept it nice. The basement was finished back in the 80s with this outdated wood paneling and carpet that's probably older than I am. There's a pull-out couch down there where we were sleeping. Friday was just a normal day. We went to the mall, got some food, and came back to watch movies in the basement. It was around 11:30 when Lily fell asleep next to me while I was still scrolling through my phone. I remember checking the time, 11:32 exactly, and thinking I should probably get some sleep too. I turned off my phone, put it on the side table, and laid back with my head on the pillow. That's when things started getting weird. I was completely awake, just staring at the ceiling, when this wave of comfort came over me. Not just relaxation, but this intense, almost drug-like euphoria. I've never done heroin, but I imagine it feels something like that, this rush of warmth and pleasure washing through my entire body. At the same time, I started hearing this weird humming sound in my left ear. It was low frequency, kind of mechanical, and totally rhythmic, like a pulse. In my right ear, there was this slower ringing tone. The two sounds weren't in sync at all, which made it even more disorienting. The strangest part was that the faster the ringing got in my right ear, the more relaxed and euphoric I felt. I should have been freaked out. I was fully awake with my eyes wide open, but instead I just felt this unnatural calmness spreading through me. I tried to turn my head to look at Lily, but I couldn't move, not even a finger. I wasn't panicking though, which was bizarre in itself. The euphoria kept building as the sounds in my ears got louder and more intense. Then the vision started. It wasn't like I was seeing things in front of me. It was like my mind was being pulled to other places in the house. First, I saw my grandmother's living room upstairs. The vision was crystal clear, like I was floating in the middle of the room, but everything had this weird bluish tint, and standing in the center was this pale, fuzzy silhouette, not quite human-shaped, more like a smudge of light that pulsated with the sounds in my ears. The vision flashed away, and suddenly I was seeing the kitchen, same blue tint, same fuzzy figure standing by the sink. Then the bathroom, the hallway, my grandmother's bedroom. Each scene flashing before me for just seconds, always with that figure somewhere in the frame. I don't know how long this went on, maybe minutes, maybe longer. Time felt completely distorted, but then, without any warning, everything changed. The euphoria vanished instantly. In its place came the most intense terror I've ever felt. My whole body went cold, and I felt this crushing anxiety in my chest, like someone was sitting on me. The sounds in my ears turned harsh and painful, and the visions started coming faster, flashing before my eyes like someone was changing TV channels rapidly. Then I felt it. This sensation like my brain was being physically squeezed inside my skull. Not a headache, but actual pressure, like someone had reached inside my head and was compressing my brain with their hands. The pain was indescribable. I still couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to wake Lily, but my body was completely paralyzed. I've had sleep paralysis a few times before, but this was entirely different. With sleep paralysis, I always knew I was dreaming. This felt 100% real, and I was absolutely certain I hadn't fallen asleep. The vision suddenly stopped, but the paralysis and the brain-squeezing sensation remained. I laid there, completely immobile, feeling like my head was in a vice grip, listening to those awful sounds still pulsing in my ears. I fought against the paralysis with everything I had. I focused all my energy on just moving one finger, then my hand, then my arm. I don't know how long I struggled. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When I finally broke free, my entire body convulsed violently. I shot up from the bed, gasping for air, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. The sounds in my ears were gone, but the pressure in my head remained. Lily was still asleep somehow. I reached over and shook her awake, probably harder than I should have. She sat up, confused and groggy, asking what was wrong. I couldn't even explain it to her. All I could say was, "We need to go upstairs, now." She could see I was terrified. My whole body was shaking so badly I could barely stand. She helped me up the stairs to the living room, asking what happened, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain something like that? We sat on my grandmother's couch with all the lights on until the sun came up. I didn't want to go back to the basement. I didn't want to close my eyes. The trembling in my body continued for hours, like I'd been out in freezing weather too long. The pressure in my head slowly faded, but I could still feel the echo of it, like the phantom pain after an injury. By morning, I had calmed down enough to try explaining what happened to Lily. She listened without judgment, but I could tell she thought it was just a particularly bad episode of sleep paralysis. I've tried to convince her it wasn't, but how can I prove something like that? It's been 3 days, and I still feel off. The trembling comes back sometimes, especially when I think about what happened. I've had this lingering headache that won't go away, and sometimes I hear what sounds like a faint echo of that humming in my left ear. I haven't been back to my grandmother's house. I made up some excuse about having to work, and we left Saturday morning. Lily thinks I'm overreacting, but she didn't experience it. She didn't feel what I felt. I've spent the last 3 days researching similar experiences online. Some people mention sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucinations, but none of those explanations seem to fit. Sleep paralysis doesn't make your brain feel like it's being physically compressed. It doesn't leave you trembling for hours afterward. Some accounts I've found mention similar audio hallucinations before paranormal experiences, that low-frequency humming and rhythmic ringing. Some call it a precursor to astral projection or an encounter with something not human. I don't know what to believe anymore. I've never been a spiritual person, but this experience has shaken me to my core. Whatever happened to me in that basement wasn't normal. It wasn't sleep paralysis, it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't my imagination. Something reached into my mind and physically affected my body in a way I can't explain. The most terrifying part is that I don't know if it's over. What if it happens again? What if next time I can't break free from the paralysis? What if next time whatever was squeezing my brain decides to do worse? I haven't told anyone except Lily, and now all of you. I don't know what I'm looking for. Validation, similar experiences, an explanation that makes sense. I just know I needed to get this out. The rational part of me wants to believe there's a scientific explanation, maybe some kind of seizure or neurological event. But the part of me that experienced it knows better. There was intelligence behind what happened to me. Those pale figures in my visions weren't random hallucinations. They were observing me somehow. My grandmother called yesterday to ask why we left so suddenly. I couldn't tell her the truth. How do you tell your 70-year-old grandmother that something in her house invaded your mind and physically manipulated your brain? She'd think I'd lost it. For now, I'm just trying to process what happened and move forward. I'm sleeping with the lights on, which Lily thinks is ridiculous, but she's being supportive. I've started recording myself while I sleep, just in case it happens again and there's some physical manifestation I can document. If anyone has experienced anything similar or has any insight, please share. I need to understand what happened to me. I need to know if I'm in danger. Most of all, I need to know if it's going to happen again, because I honestly don't think I could handle going through that a second time. I should be seeing a doctor about the lingering headache, but what would I even say? Something supernatural squeezed my brain and now it hurts. They'd send me straight to the psych ward. For now, I'm just taking it day by day. But I know one thing for certain. I'm never sleeping in that basement again. And part of me wonders if my grandmother has experienced anything similar over the years, but has just never talked about it. Whatever happened to me that night was real. I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't hallucinating, and I wasn't having sleep paralysis. Something found me in that basement. Something got inside my head, and I don't know why it let me go. Story 21. I never believed in ghosts until I moved into that house in Tokyo. It's been 8 months since I left, but I still wake up sometimes expecting to hear those sounds again. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest friends, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm Miyu, 23 years old, and last year I managed to find what seemed like an incredible deal. A traditional Meiji period home in a decent Tokyo neighborhood at a surprisingly affordable rent. I should have known better. Properties in Tokyo don't stay cheap without a reason. The first week was fine, just the usual stress of moving boxes and arranging furniture. I was so excited to have my own place with actual character, not some cookie-cutter apartment. The wooden beams running across the ceiling, the sliding doors with their rice paper panels, even the slightly uneven wooden floors, it all felt so authentic compared to modern buildings. The scratching started on my 8th night. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a light, persistent scratching sound coming from inside my bedroom wall. At first, I assumed it was mice. The house was old after all. But the moment I sat up in bed, the sound stopped completely. I turned on my light, waited, but heard nothing. The second I laid back down and turned off the light, it started again, like someone was waiting for me to try to sleep. This happened 3 nights in a row, always stopping the moment I moved or turned on a light, always resuming when I tried to sleep. By the 4th night, I started to feel like whatever was making the sound knew exactly what I was doing. I called my friend Akiko to come stay over. I needed someone else to hear it so I wouldn't feel crazy. That night, we stayed up late watching movies on my laptop. Around 1 in the morning, we were both almost asleep when there was this massive bang from the bathroom. It sounded exactly like someone had slammed the bathroom door as hard as they could. We both jumped up. Akiko grabbed my arm so tight it left marks. We sat frozen, listening. My bathroom door was already open. I could see it from my futon, and I lived alone. There were no neighbors sharing walls on that side of the house. "What the hell was that?" Akiko whispered. I shook my head. We got up and checked every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing had fallen. There was absolutely no explanation for that sound. Akiko left the next morning, making some excuse about needing to help her mom. I don't blame her. I would have left too if I had somewhere to go. But my savings were tied up in the deposit and first month's rent, and Tokyo housing is impossible to find on short notice. A few nights later, I was lying awake at midnight, staring at my ceiling and listening for the scratching. Instead of waiting passively, I decided to investigate. I got up and started knocking on different parts of my bedroom wall, thinking maybe there was a hollow space where animals could be nesting. I knocked 3 times on the wall next to my closet, and something knocked back. 3 distinct knocks in the exact same rhythm I had used. My blood went cold. I told myself it was an echo, maybe a pipe. I knocked again, 4 times in a different pattern. 4 knocks came back, matching my pattern perfectly. I ran out of my room and spent the rest of the night huddled on my couch with all the lights on. After that night, I started noticing more things. The house felt different when I came home from work, like someone had been moving through the rooms while I was gone. Nothing was ever actually moved, but the air felt disturbed somehow. I'd find doors open that I was certain I'd closed. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain areas of the house for no reason. The laundry incident was what finally convinced me this wasn't just my imagination. The washing machine was upstairs in a small utility room. I was loading clothes one evening, completely alone in the house with music playing softly on my phone. As I was measuring detergent, I heard a woman's voice speak directly into my right ear, so close I could feel the breath. The voice spoke in Japanese, but it was muffled and unclear, like someone talking underwater. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the empty doorway and the dark hallway beyond. I abandoned my laundry and ran downstairs. I was shaking so badly I could barely text Akiko. She suggested I talk to her friend May, who was into spiritual things. I was skeptical about all that stuff before, but at this point, I was desperate for any explanation. May came over the next day. She didn't look like what I expected. No crystals or weird clothes, just a normal college student in jeans and a sweater. But the moment she walked in, she stopped in the entryway and looked up at the ceiling. "You have something here," she said quietly. "Something old." She walked through the house while I followed nervously. When we reached the top of the stairs, she stopped outside 2 rooms I'd been unconsciously avoiding, a small bedroom I used for storage and a closet under the eaves. "This is where it's strongest," she said, pointing at both rooms, "especially in there." She nodded toward the closet. "Have you looked inside?" I shook my head. "I just use it for storage. There were already some old boxes in there when I moved in, and I just added mine on top." May frowned. "I think we should look." I really didn't want to, but I also needed answers. We opened the closet door and pulled out my boxes first. Behind them were several older cardboard boxes, yellowed with age, and a dusty mirror leaning against the wall, turned to face inward. As soon as May reached for one of the old boxes, there was a loud rattling sound from inside the closet, like something was shaking the walls. We both jumped back. The noise grew louder, turning into a rumbling that seemed to come from the very structure of the house. "Close it," I shouted, and May slammed the door shut. The sound immediately stopped. We looked at each other, both pale and shaking. "I don't think it wants us touching those things," May said. "What is it?" I whispered. "I don't know exactly, but this house has history. Old houses like this, especially ones that have always been rentals rather than family homes, they collect energy, and not always good energy." The next morning, I had the most terrifying experience yet. I woke up around 5:30 to the sound of someone banging on my bedroom window. Not knocking, banging, like they were trying to break in. My window faced the side of the house, about 6 feet off the ground. I sat up, frozen in fear. The banging continued, growing more insistent. I could see the curtains shaking with each impact. Finally, I gathered my courage and threw back the curtains. There was no one there, no shadow, no figure retreating, nothing that could have made that sound. And my window was small. Anyone banging on it would have been clearly visible. I called my landlord that day and asked about the history of the house. He was evasive, just saying it had been a rental property for decades and had seen many tenants come and go. When I pressed him about previous renters leaving suddenly or complaining about strange occurrences, he got defensive and reminded me I'd signed a 1-year lease. I started documenting everything. I set up my phone to record audio at night, and every morning I'd find the same things. Hours of silence interrupted by scratching sounds, occasional thuds, and twice what sounded like whispered words in Japanese too faint to make out. May came back with some protective charms and suggested we try to learn more about what was in the house. Against my better judgment, I agreed to open that closet again. This time, we brought salt, May's idea, and spread it in a line across the doorway before opening it. Inside, we carefully moved the boxes out one by one. The rumbling started again, but softer this time, more like a warning than an attack. When we got to the mirror, May reached to turn it around so we could see its surface. The moment her fingers touched the frame, it felt like the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The mirror suddenly shifted, rotating away from us on its own until it faced the wall again. May jumped back, knocking over one of the boxes. Old photographs, letters written in faded ink, and what looked like a woman's hair comb spilled onto the floor. The rumbling turned into a roar. The lights flickered throughout the house, and then silence. Complete and absolute silence, like even the normal sounds of the house and the street outside had been swallowed up. May and I looked at each other, both understanding without words that we'd crossed some line. We quickly replaced everything exactly as we'd found it and closed the closet door. That night, the activity escalated. The scratching in my walls became louder, more frantic. I heard footsteps crossing the floor above my bedroom when I was downstairs. The bathroom door slammed repeatedly, even when I propped it open with a heavy box. And twice, I distinctly heard a woman's voice call out something that sounded like a name. I started researching the Meiji period and the area where my house stood. I discovered that before the modernization of Tokyo, this neighborhood had been the site of a small village. During the rapid changes of the Meiji era, many traditional homes were abandoned or repurposed as Japan embraced Western influences. I wondered if something had happened here during that tumultuous time, something that left an imprint strong enough to last over a century. Over the next week, things got progressively worse. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments as if someone was tidying up after me. The mirror in my bathroom would fog up even when no one had showered, and one morning I found what looked like a woman's footprint in the dust of the unused upstairs room, smaller than mine, with the distinctive outline of a traditional Japanese sandal. I broke my lease after just 2 months, lost my deposit, and had to borrow money from my parents for a new place. The landlord didn't even seem surprised when I said I was leaving. He just nodded and said he'd list the property again. I never found out what was in that house or what it wanted. Sometimes I think about the photographs we spilled, the old comb, the letters in faded ink. Was it her house once? Did something happen that bound her to that place, making her resent anyone who tried to make it their home? I don't know, but even now, in my new, perfectly normal apartment building with neighbors on all sides, I sometimes wake up at night thinking I hear scratching in my walls, and I find myself holding my breath, waiting to see if it stops when I move. Story 22. I've never been what you would call normal. Ever since I can remember, I've had this weird connection to things most people don't see or feel. My mom used to tell me I had an overactive imagination, but I knew it was more than that. I could feel them, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them. They were as real to me as the living people around me. My first encounter happened when I was 5. We were living in this old house in Ravenwood. You know, one of those historic towns where every building has a story. I was playing in my room when I saw him, a little boy about my age, wearing clothes that looked like they were from another time. He didn't say anything, just watched me play with my toys. When I told my mom, she checked the whole house, found nothing, and told me it was just my imagination. But I knew what I saw. Things stayed relatively quiet until my teen years. My parents had divorced, and my mom and I moved to this 2-story house on the edge of town. It wasn't particularly old or creepy looking, just a normal suburban home. We brought our dog Max with us. I thought things would be better there, you know, a fresh start. I was so wrong. It started subtly. The kitchen was always freezing, no matter how high we turned up the heat. Mom would blame poor insulation, but it was more than that. You could literally feel the temperature drop the moment you stepped through the doorway. Then came the doors, opening and closing on their own when no windows were open, no drafts present. The sound of footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. But the weird thing was, whatever was in that house seemed fixated on me specifically. Mum experienced some things, sure, but it was like this presence had chosen me as its primary target. My bedroom became ground zero. Every night I'd feel watched, that sensation of eyes boring into you from the darkness. My closet door would open and close by itself, sometimes slowly, sometimes with a bang that would make me jump out of my skin. I'd wake up with scratches on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain, little bite marks on my ankles. I started seeing things too. There were two distinct, I don't know what to call them, manifestations. One was a little girl with long dark hair. She would appear at the foot of my bed or in the hallway outside my room. She never felt threatening, just sad. But the other one, God, even thinking about it now makes my skin crawl. It was tall, taller than any normal person, just a dark, shadowy figure that I'd catch in my peripheral vision. It would stand in corners or doorways, watching. Sometimes it would move so fast across my vision that I'd question if I'd seen it at all. But I knew it was real because Max would see it too. He'd growl at empty corners or bark at nothing in the middle of the night. The activity escalated from just watching to physical interactions. I'd be sitting at my desk doing homework and suddenly feel hands running through my hair. Not gentle either, pulling, tugging, like it wanted to hurt me. One time, I was home alone, and my desk fan literally flew off the table and hit the wall across the room. There was no way it could have fallen that direction or with that force. I became terrified of sleeping in the dark. I'd keep a lamp on, my TV, anything to push back the darkness where it seemed to thrive. My mum thought I was being ridiculous at first. She was pretty skeptical about paranormal stuff, despite some of the things she'd experienced herself. That changed one night when we were watching TV in the living room. The glass door that led to the basement suddenly shattered, just exploded inward, glass everywhere. We had security cameras, and when we checked the footage, there was nothing. No one near the door, no object hitting it, nothing. It just broke. That's when Mum started to believe me. The final straw came after we'd been out grocery shopping. We pulled into the driveway, and every light in the house was on, every single one, even though we'd definitely turned them all off before leaving. And there, in the small attic window at the very top of the house, was a figure, just standing there, watching us pull in. Mom saw it too. She grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. We both froze in the car, staring up at it, and then suddenly all the lights went out at once. The house went dark in an instant. We stayed with my aunt that night. Mom called a realtor the next day, and within a month, we'd moved. I thought that would be the end of it. Most hauntings are tied to locations, right? That's what all the shows and books say. But whatever was attached to me in that house, it followed me. Years have passed. I'm 25 now, and due to financial circumstances, I'm still living with my parents. We're in a completely different home, miles away from the haunted house. But it's still with me. The same presence, the same feeling of being watched in my room. I still wake up with scratches, mostly on my neck and chest now, which is even more terrifying. Things move in my room when I'm not there. My jewelry will be rearranged, or clothes I hung up will be on the floor. There are taps from inside my closet at night. 3 distinct taps, always in the same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Sometimes I hear voices, my parents calling my name from downstairs, but when I check, they're asleep. Or worse, my own voice calling from an empty room. Recently, I've started seeing it again. That shadowy mass. It runs past my door when I'm alone in my room. Just a quick dark blur in my peripheral vision. But I know what it is. Max died a few years ago, but our new dog, Bella, sees it too. She'll track something with her eyes across an empty room, her hackles raised, growling low in her throat. The weird thing is, my parents rarely experience anything. It's like this thing is focused entirely on me. Has been since I was a teenager. It's attached itself to me somehow, and I don't know how to get rid of it. Last week I woke up around 3 in the morning to find my bedroom door wide open. I always close it before bed because Bella pushes it open with her nose and comes in, and I'm a light sleeper, but there it was, standing wide open, and in the hallway was that familiar tall, dark silhouette, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. That paralyzing fear just took over. Then it slowly raised what looked like an arm and beckoned to me, one slow, deliberate curl of its finger, calling me to come closer. I pulled my blanket over my head like a child and lay there shaking until morning. When I finally worked up the courage to look, the hallway was empty and my door was closed again. Last night was even worse. I was in the shower and thought I heard the bathroom door open. I called out, thinking it was my mom, but got no answer. When I pulled back the shower curtain to check, there was nothing there. But when I got out and wiped the steam from the mirror, there were words written in the condensation. Always here. I ran out of the bathroom in just my towel, screaming for my parents. By the time they got there, the mirror was just fogged up. No message. They think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. I know what I've been experiencing my whole life. This isn't just an overactive imagination or anxiety or whatever else people want to label it. This is real. I've tried everything. Sage, prayers, crystals, having a priest come bless the house, though he clearly thought I was crazy. Nothing works. It's like this thing is bound to me personally, not to any physical location. I'm desperate for help. I haven't had a good night's sleep in years. I'm constantly on edge, waiting for the next manifestation, the next physical attack. I can't keep living like this. The worst part is feeling so alone with it all. Even when my mum saw things in the old house, she never experienced the physical aspect. The scratches, the hair pulling, the feeling of constant malevolent attention. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Was it because I could see spirits even as a child? Did that somehow open a door that can't be closed? I need to know how to rid myself of something that's been with me for over a decade now, something that seems content to torment me for the rest of my life, something that knows me, follows me, and refuses to leave me alone. I'm writing this with my back against the wall, literally. I can't keep looking over my shoulder because I swear I just saw that shadow dart across my room again. Tap, tap, tap. There it is again from inside my closet. I'm not going to check. Not this time. What do you do when the haunting isn't tied to a house, but to you?